you ever going to start this podcast you've been talking about for like forever?
Do you think that anyone will actually want to listen to something like this?
What is your plan for an introduction?
Are you sure you want to talk about these topics? People usually disagree.
3 hours? Are you crazy?
Do you think you're some kind of expert or something?
Are you planning to have an intro song?
What if a bunch of people get really mad and hate you over this?
Do you even know how to make a podcast?
Are you just doing this because you like to argue with people?
Don't let this be just one more thing that you talk about doing, but never actually do.
Wouldn't it be better to do just one episode for each topic?
Stop trying to change people's opinions. Just live your own life.
Dude, people are never going to agree. Just let it go.
Is this going to be a long intro? Because if it is, I'm bored already.
Hi, another great episode in store for you today. But first, I'm sure that you've played the game Would You Rather at some point in your life. But if not, I can explain it briefly. Someone would ask you, would you rather this or that? And in the place of this or that, they would put two things that you probably wouldn't want to do ever in a bazillion years. So you are forced to pick the lesser of two horrible situations. It's never something like, would you rather eat an ice cream sundae or get eaten by flesh-eating bacteria? That would be too easy. It's always something along the lines of, would you rather have an earwig crawl into your brain and lay eggs, or have someone pour acid in your eyeballs? Anyway, you get the idea. My kids used to like playing this game with me, but no longer. The reason? Because I will ask follow-up questions. Now, I think that these follow-up questions are very much valid and have a huge impact on my answer. But my kids just want me to answer the question. But how can I do that without having all of the necessary information? For example, if the question is, would you rather fall off the tallest mountain or be thrown into a lion's den? There are many, many questions that need to be answered here. Do I have a parachute when I fall off the mountain? Do I have any kind of weapon or a piece of meat or something when I'm thrown into the lion's den? Are the lions vegetarian? How steep is the mountain? I mean, would I be rolling down the mountain or free-falling for miles until I struck the bottom? Do you see what I mean? This is crucial information that will help me decide which of these two things I would rather. Yet my kids just roll their eyes and walk away. Maybe this means I win? I don't know. Today my guest is Daniel Hamlin, or as my kids call him, Dan the man with the big white van. I didn't know Dan very well when we sat down for this discussion. He's the youth pastor of the youth group that my kids go to, and it was awesome getting to know him better. Dan is a surfer and world traveler, sometimes even a world-traveling surfer, and has had some very unique life experiences. Topics we discussed today are Dogwood, Lagwagon, raising children, U2, skateboarding, surfing, sharks, Nicaragua, Napoleon Dynamite, the TV show Lost, Paul Simon, Gregory Alan Isakov, Josh Garrels, hymns, Children 18.3, Donald Trump, Calvinism, legislating morality, Ron DeSantis, exposing kids to sexual concepts, absolute truth, murder versus killing, and the value of life. Just as with the last episode, I have to warn you that when we do discuss the TV show Lost, there are many, many spoilers. And, just so everyone knows, Dan did go back and start watching Lost again. You will understand when you get to that part of the discussion. I hope you enjoy our conversation. We spent about an hour doing that or so, and then politics, and then spirituality, and
okay.
That
Hopefully
can be,
you can get an hour out of me on music. Yeah.
You're not much of a music guy, or
I mean, yeah, I don't know a ton
oh,
about
okay.
It. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I have my stuff I like, but
yeah.
I'm still musically.
Well, you're like a surfer and stuff, right? So I mean,
yeah.
You seem like you'd be into like some of that kind of stuff, like surf music and.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, okay. I guess.
Okay.
In high school, yeah, I was maybe a little more into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Like were you ever like a skater at all at all, or was it just surfing for you?
Early. My childhood, I skated a lot, and so I skated up until probably junior high, and then I got out of it for a while. Sort of got back into it, broke my foot, and then I was kind of
from skating.
Ooh. And
how'd you do that? Just land a trick wrong or something, or
it was really, really dumb.
Nothing that cool.
No, I was trying to ollie over like I think it was like a 2-inch thing.
Oh no!
Just land like
yeah, and it was actually broke.
Yeah, broke my ankle, and so I was after that. I was out for a few months, and I was just like, I don't want to hurt myself this much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it was shortly after that I started getting into surfing.
Okay.
And when I got into surfing, I just kind of went all into it. And,
okay.
So I was musically listening to, like, back then, a lot of like punk rock. And
now you're speaking my language, man.
Okay,
that's my favorite genre.
Really?
It's 90s skate punk. Yeah, I love it.
So I listened to like Lagwagon.
Oh, nice.
And that whole scene.
Like Fat Records stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Fat Records.
Nice.
No Use for a Name.
Yeah.
My friends turned me on to Dogwood, which was a Christian punk band. That was like the first Christian punk band that I heard that I actually liked. And I was like, oh, this is actually good.
And my opinion of that is that to me, I think that's the best Christian punk band. I mean, I like a lot of other ones too, but their lyrics are so cut to the heart. Like, it's just hardcore, man. I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
I first heard them because I used to work at Taco Bell when I was 16.
Okay.
I used to hate Christians. I used to hate everything. I didn't grow up in the church. Yeah, I hated Christians. I hated the Bible. Hated all of it. But I was really into punk rock, probably from about 14 or 15 on.
Okay.
Bad Religion is what got me into it to begin with. But I was working at Taco Bell, and there was a guy there that I had known from high school that was now a Christian.
Okay.
And he was always witnessing to me and preaching to me and all this stuff. And then one day he comes in and he goes, hey, check this out. And he gives me a cassette tape, right? So on one side of the tape is Pokin' Atcha by MXPX, and on the other side is Teenage Politics by MXPX, right? Their first two albums.
Yeah.
So I put that in. I was kind of reluctant, but I loved music and I loved punk rock. I was like, all right, fine, I'll give Christian punk a shot, and I popped it in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm loving this. I'm digging this.
Yeah.
So and then I ran out of that. I played it out, and then so I ended up down at the Bible bookstore in order to get some more MXPX music, and I ran into another friend of mine who I had played tennis with in high school.
Okay.
Who his jaw just about hit the floor when he saw me walk in there, because everybody knew that guy. He's not about God at all. Like, he's not at all.
That's funny.
And so he's like, dude, what are you doing here? I said, well, and I kind of told him the story I just told you. Like, well, I'm here to get some more MXPX. I'm really digging this Christian punk band. He's like, dude, there's a lot of good Christian punk bands. Let me show you. So then he brought me over to one of those listening stations, right?
Yeah.
And he showed me like Value Pack and Goatee Hook and Dogwood was one of them. And I think it was when like More Than Conquerors had just come out.
Okay.
And I heard that and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like awesome.
Yeah, totally.
This is really cool.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until quite a few years later that I became a Christian, and then I started to really get into like Tooth and Nail Records and stuff like that. But yeah, Lagwagon is a favorite for sure. And No Use for a Name is another. Just that's such a. I was so bummed when I heard Tony Sly had passed.
Yeah,
and I was like, dang, dude, like he just seemed like such a cool guy. I never met him, but
there was that might have been. And this is where I'm not super informed on music stuff, but my dad used to work with a lady. My dad worked for Santa Barbara County for a long time.
Okay.
And he worked with a lady whose son was in No Use for a Name.
Oh, really?
And then he, I guess, eventually went to, why am I spacing on the name?
To a different band? Or?
But it was, Foo Fighters.
Oh, it was Chris Shiflett or Chris, what's his last name? Not Shiflett. I always get Flippin'? No. There's a bunch of Chris's that were all involved in that, and they all have different last names.
I don't know. I can't remember the last name. But I just remember him because I obviously loved No Use for a Name.
Right.
And so he was he came home one day and somehow I mentioned the band and he's all, oh, my coworker's son's in that band.
Oh,
and
nice.
I was like, really? And then I kind of followed. I would ask him periodically, is he still playing? And then eventually he told my dad was like, yeah, he's in this band now called Foo Fighters.
This little unknown band, right?
Oh, no way.
That's awesome. Because obviously not few people, but there's a lot more people that have heard of Foo Fighters than No Use for a Name.
Yeah, exactly.
But I remember when I heard that too. I was like, man. And then I started getting realizing how much Dave Grohl is into the punk scene. Like you see him on Facebook all the time. He's hanging out with Fat Mike from NoFX, or like he's got these pictures with all these guys. I'm like, he's not. Foo Fighters aren't even punk rock, you know. It's totally, it's just weird, you know. But
I know, it was, and I don't even know if he like was super good friends with the lady. It worked in the same office, and he just was like, her son's in this band, and I was impressed because of No Use for a Name, and then, but it was just funny. Like it was like a few years later, he's like, he's in this band. Foo Fighters.
Awesome.
I've heard of that one.
Oh man, that's crazy. Is No Use for a Name? Are they Santa Barbara area? I know Lagwagon is.
Yeah, I'm not positive. I was kind of surprised myself to hear that because he was working in Santa Barbara at the time. Okay. I was like, I didn't know he would. Anybody was local from that band. But.
Right. I always thought No Use for a Name was Bay Area, but I could totally be wrong there.
It could have been. It wasn't like he was living at her house at the time. He was like grown, you know.
Okay. But, so he might have moved out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
do you have what's your? How did you first get into like No Use for a Name and Lagwagon? Was it like on a comp, or was it like your friend showed it to you?
No, it was my brother. So I have an older brother, and so he was in high school at the time. Okay. Now he's like four years.
He's my age, right? Is Matt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we talked about how I kind of know your dad,
right.
or your brother.
That's right.
He was friends with people I knew. Like he was friends with Tony Payne, whose brother Brian was like my best friend growing up. So we were at the same places at the same times a lot, even though it was like Tony and his friends and then Brian and his friends, but we clashed every once in a while. So that's really cool.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah,
I haven't seen Matt since probably since high school. So but
he's still around. He's doing good. He's got a little girl.
Nice.
But I used to kind of whatever he would get into, I would kind of get into. I just kind of idolized him growing up, and so anything he did, I was just kind of like tag along into. And so he started getting into punk music, and so then I started getting into punk music. And, but then as I got more into surfing, it kind of went hand in hand. There was like a big punk scene within the surf scene. And so,
for sure.
Yeah, so then it kind of, I guess developed its own thing. My friends and I would go to punk shows and stuff.
Okay.
And,
have you seen anybody live that I would know?
No, I mean it was all local punk
stuff.
Shows.
Okay.
Yeah, like I think with the Santa Barbara was kind of the furthest we'd go.
Okay.
But back then there would always be like warehouses or like random buildings that punk bands would play in, and you could like. Somehow word would get out or whatever, and you just show up and they'd be like packed.
Right.
And you'd be like, wait, what? Like, yeah. And I remember the old, by that old where Kmart used to be.
Here in town.
Okay. Like at the very.
end. At the end, it was Two Toes, and then it was Chuck E. Cheese when I was a little kid.
Exactly, Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah,
and then it was Two Toes, and then it was Kids Land or something. It was a bunch of different places.
And I remember going to like a show there.
Yeah.
There was like a bunch of punk bands playing. And I just remember thinking, this is Chuck E. Cheese. Like, how are punk bands playing?
Right. Yeah. And I remember that. I never went to a show there, but I do remember hearing about it.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was that was playing. But you had a bunch of stuff. One of my guests I just had on a few, like last week, he was talking about like how Propagandhi had played in Guadalupe.
Oh, really?
At that old theater. They used to have shows there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was when we were in high school.
Yeah.
So I didn't go to that one, but I've actually never seen Propagandhi. But we got to go to. It used to be like the Living Room in Goleta was a good venue.
Yes,
they used to have. I saw AFI there. I saw some other ones there, and the Ventura Theater, obviously, they still occasionally have. We just saw Dogwood there not too long ago.
Did you really?
Yeah, it was Dogwood, Five Iron Frenzy, and MXPX.
I used to like Five Iron Frenzy a lot too.
That's one of my favorite all-time bands. Yeah, and I'm not a big ska guy, but again, lyrically, their song "Dandelions" is just so moving to me. Like it's just such an amazing telling of the love of God, towards His children. It's just awesome. Totally. But so did you grow up in the church, or did you?
Yes, So my parents have been believers.
But they were okay with you listening to things like No Use for Name and Lagwagon and...
Yeah, their approach was they would give us the freedom to listen to, you know, what we wanted, but they always heavily...
monitored?
Well, not monitored, but heavily encouraged us to be wise about what we were listening to.
Okay.
Because their thing was that what we put in is really important. You know, like what we're putting into our minds is super important. And,
right.
And music has a way of getting in more so than other avenues. And so obviously they were not okay with like satanic stuff.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is there a limit, like, to where they would say,
totally.
No, you can't listen to that?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So there was like, you know, limits to it,
okay.
But it was more of just like, use your judgment, your discernment. We're going to trust you, and there were times where we would push the boundaries, and they would kind of sit us down and be like, is this something that you really need to be listening to? And
right.
But it was funny. I also remember sometimes we'd get my dad into like Lagwagon, for instance. I remember like we were driving and he was letting us listen to it in the car one time, and
nice.
After a while he was kind of into it, you know.
That's so awesome. Yeah.
Like,
turning your dad punk rock.
Yeah.
Wow. Which album was it? Do you remember?
I don't.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but so they were very, very much like gave us freedom, but they just wanted us to be, I guess, wise in
right.
how we, you know, mature in our approach, and we weren't always that way, you know. Like obviously we listened to some stuff we shouldn't have.
Right.
But they would talk about us more, talk about it with us more, you know, like why we shouldn't.
Right, like teaching opportunities and that kind of thing.
Exactly. When we were little, obviously there was a lot more of them deciding what we could and couldn't listen to or couldn't watch. But when we got into high school and stuff, I think their approach, they knew that like at public school you're going to come across stuff, you know, that they have no control over.
Right.
And so wanting to be able to, I guess, instill in us the ability to make right choices,
right?
Even if they're not around, you know,
right?
And
right.
so that was kind of their approach.
Yeah, there's kind of the two approaches to raising kids, right? It's either the shelter everything or the kind of controlled exposure to where you're like, I'm gonna let them do these certain things or watch these things, hear these things when we're there to teach, right, and show, because like you said, they go out into the world, you're going to get all that, right? So do you, like, as I know you don't have kids, but like when you have kids someday, are you going to be kind of employing, you think, the same kind of model, or do you see some flaws in it, or?
That's a loaded question, man.
I'll ask a lot of those, I'm sure.
Especially now that I'm working with youth all the time, and I'm more privy maybe to what's out there than I was maybe 5 years ago, you know. It can be a little bit intimidating to think like, okay, how am I gonna bring someone up in this world and expose them or not expose, you know, how am I, like, where's the balance there? And, and I think if I were raising my own kids, I guess my goal would be to raise them in a way where they would make the right choices on their own. I wouldn't have to make it for them.
Right.
But that's so much easier said than done.
Right. And I think ideally that is correct, right? Like that's the way that you think that, well, that's the best way.
Yeah.
But then you hear all these examples where that kind of blows up in the face of the parents, you know, and it's like, oh, my kid's doing all this stuff, and their response, well, you let me do all this stuff, like,
and I think there's a balance, and I think it's also, you can't necessarily maybe make a mold and say everybody has to fit into this mold, because each child's going to present their own strengths and weaknesses, and so some kids may need a little more sheltering or whatever, or more, your hand in making decisions more, and then some kids might be a little more mature or have a little more maybe solid walk with the Lord, and so they're making wise decisions on their own naturally by the Holy Spirit, so then you don't have to intervene as much, so that I think it's nuanced, like trying to
well, I mean, having 4 kids like we do, they're all so different.
Totally.
Like whether it's their intellectual learning with school, or whether it's their attitudes, their walk with the Lord. I mean, it's all different, especially now that we have everywhere from our oldest is going to be 25, and then we have all the way down to 13.
Right.
And you're watching kind of, at least with my older 2, we're watching kind of the adult side of it. Like we're seeing the fruit of our parenting, basically, and sometimes it's like, oh, we did a good job there, and sometimes like, oh crap, we probably should have done something a little different, but of course you can't solely blame the parents for everything the kids do. They're their own people, and that's something I've always told my kids, even when it comes to faith, is like, no, you need to develop your own relationship or not, but you can't have mine, right? Like I can teach you all these things, I can tell you why I believe what I believe, I can tell you my testimony, how I came from a Christian hating guy into becoming a Christian himself, all that, right? But ultimately, it's their life, right?
Totally.
They're their own unique soul that needs to find themselves, to use a hippie term. But
no, it's so true. And the unfortunate part is, I feel like culturally, there's such a move to find like a scapegoat for you know what I mean. So if something is wrong in your life, it's because someone else caused it, and so that is hard, because obviously that's not to diminish any harm that other people have caused that do end up causing issues in your life, but like you said, at some point we each kind of decide for ourselves and make our own choices, and so there is that aspect of you could even raise a kid perfectly, and they're still their own person and going to make their own choices, and they might choose to totally ignore everything you've done and said and go the opposite way.
It's that whole nature versus nurture dispute, right? It's like I personally know people that now are hooked big into drugs, and they're got all these problems, and there's all the in and out of jail and all this, and their parents were great, like they had a great upbringing. And then I also know people that's parents were abusive, people that were molested early, like all these things have happened to them. They their parents were drug addicts or whatever, and they're just some of the most wonderful people I've ever met.
So
it's just so interesting, and that's why I don't hold to one side or the other of the nature and nurture. I think it's both. And maybe some people, like it'll go more nurture or more nature depending on the person, but it's always both. You know what I mean?
100%. And depending upon the person, sometimes you're going to need to, they need a little more instruction than maybe this child did, or they need a little more freedom than this child did, or whatever. And so I do think, that a lot of it's nuanced and depending upon the individual. But, I will say the thought of how I would raise my kids has definitely changed in the last couple of years, working around so much youth and youth activity and stuff. you do, and even our world's changed so much since we were kids.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, when you were mentioning like the scapegoat thing about how people do you think there's more to that now than it was when we were kids, or because it seems like it to me?
I think so. Yeah.
Like there's just more blaming everybody but myself.
Totally.
And I feel like a lot of the psychological world and just the world in general supports that and teaches them, no, none of this is your fault, sweetie. Right. It's all your parents' fault, or it's all this guy's fault, or your boss's fault, or it's like always doing that. And I'm like, man, take responsibility for something.
Yeah. And no, I agree. Yeah, totally. And it is indicative of like a society that doesn't want to be accountable. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to is certainly, again, not to diminish hardship or wrongs done to people that have caused issues in their life, because that's certainly a valid and real thing, but those still aren't excuses for choices we make, you know? And so no matter what's done to me, I still choose how I'm gonna react to them.
Absolutely.
And so and that gets hard because, like you said, our culture wants to find the scapegoat and be like, well, they're robbing banks because this happened to them.
Right.
Like
they grew up in a broken home, or they didn't have a father figure or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, and again, I have all the sympathy and compassion for the harms done to people. Like, I don't diminish that at all, but there's still comes that point where we decide, okay, I'm going to go rob this bank,
right?
And so, and that's that point where no, that's not on what was done to you. That's your choice for going to rob the bank,
right? So where maybe the thoughts might be more the that being how you're raised or whatever. You might have the thought, maybe I could rob a bank,
right?
But it's the action that makes it your responsibility, right? Because that's all of us. We all have temptation. We all have things. Well, I could do that,
right?
We don't have a thought.
Yeah, exactly.
But your thought in and of itself isn't going to hurt anybody as long as you don't act on that thought.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And so, when you get, like you said, seems like psychology and just everything is pushing this kind of mentality of well, I'm not really responsible for my choices, and that just creates kind of what I feel like the chaos that we're seeing. Where nobody is responsible for anything.
Right. That's exactly what it seems like. Yeah.
From the top down, like the highest positions in the country all the way down to the lowest. Nobody wants to be responsible for their actions or what's going on, and again, to not to diminish the person who has been sexually abused. That certainly causes issues in life and affects how we make decisions. But I don't think that the solution is to then say, well, I did this terrible thing because something terrible was done to me at some point.
Right.
We choose to make those decisions,
right. Which again is proof, because you got some people that act on that and some people that don't.
Right.
Like
totally.
you can take two people that were sexually abused, say, in the same way, at the same age, same whatever, and one turns into something, ends up in jail or whatever for the crimes they're committing, and the other one doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, well, that's choices, right? So
100%. Yeah.
So wow. All right. See where I should go next.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if any music things.
Yeah, well, I was going to go back. So, I usually ask, like, if you're not, you're a musical person, but it's not a big part of your life. But do you have earliest memories as far as?
Oh yeah,
first time you remember?
Don't get me wrong. I love music. I'm just so musically inclined.
Oh, okay.
I remember probably in my 20s, I was at church with my parents one day, and during worship.
Yeah.
And I looked over, and my mom was like laughing hysterically. And I couldn't figure out why she was laughing in church and, like in the middle of worship. And so after church, we got outside. I was like, Mom, why were you cracking up during worship? And she was like, son, I love you, but you're just the worst singer I've ever heard. And I was just like,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is so good for the self-esteem. Well, you got to appreciate that blunt honesty, right? I mean,
me and my mom can joke and poke fun at each other like that, so it wasn't like I was not offended. I thought it was really funny.
Right.
It hasn't hindered me from singing.
Yeah, that's good, man.
Anything, but
sing from your heart, even if it doesn't sound good, right?
Like I just have no
musical talent, but you appreciate listening to music.
Yeah,
you appreciate people that do have musical talent.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Like probably some of the earliest memories with like where music actually played a role in it being like memorable, or where you think back, oh, that's a good memory. Is I remember U2, the Joshua Tree album. I was probably around 8 or 9 when that came out.
I think that was 88.
88, yeah.
87, 88, somewhere around there when it came out.
Yeah, so I was 88. I would have been 8. So,
okay.
And that was also the time when I was heavily into skating.
Okay.
My dad had built like a half pipe in our backyard for us, and we just had a bunch of ramps around the house, and I was just skating a ton. And that album came out, and I remember like listening to that album over and over and again, and so it's tied to memories of like skating at night out on our half pipe. Nice. So there's like good memories of when I hear that album comes on, or those songs from the album. And
is it like did you just get the album and listen to it, or was there did you hear like Where the Streets Have No Name first on the radio and you're like, I got to get that album, or was it?
Yeah, I think my brother had got the album, like the cassette.
Okay, the cassette, yeah. My parents used to have the cassette too. That's so funny.
Yeah, so I heard him play it, and just. Like I said, part of it was just because he was listening to it, was like, oh, this has to be cool, know? And And then, but then I did really like it, and the lyrics, there was some of the lyrics, how you can hear Bono and his kind of faith journey in it.
Which is funny because back then, so I'm the same as you. Like I first heard them from my dad. Like I remember watching the Where the Streets Have No Name music video with my dad, and him saying he really liked it, and I want to say maybe I even bought him the cassette from Kmart for like Christmas or for his birthday or something, and then we would listen to it in the car, and I remember really liking it, but I had no idea that they were believers or that Bono was even a Christian probably until 10 years ago. And I know some people debate that, right? Because that he does every once in a while have some profanity in a song or something, But in interviews and stuff, he'll say Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and he'll talk like that. And I've noticed that from other countries, there's kind of a different view on things like profanity, to where they don't necessarily see it as anti-Christian or something. Around here, obviously, you're not going to hear that in a church service or something, But did you follow? Like later into U2 at all, or was it kind of? I mean, because that's obviously their best album, of course. But I mean, they did have some other stuff later too. But
I mean, I to be honest, I tried to listen to some of their other albums, but I just could never. Get
it's
into
way
it.
different. I mean, I think Achtung Baby, which is the one after Joshua Tree, is really good. And some of the earlier stuff. I mean, I think all the other ones are like there's a couple songs here and there that are good. But the Joshua Tree is like just front to back. I mean, every song on there is awesome. There's no skippable tracks at all.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of started, getting more into listening to some of their newer stuff, and it's all good, of course, but it's never like
it's not like that.
Right. I mean, you hear songs like With or Without You, or you just as soon as you hear that little, you're like, oh, it's just do. It's like, oh man, that just takes you back. So for you, when you hear Joshua Tree, even today, does it?
Oh yeah,
it takes you back to when you were a kid.
Funny. There's like memories, like I said, of skating our half pipe at night. We'd just take like a extension cord and put like a light bulb on the end of it, and just hung it on the half pipe, and then we just skate out there at night. So
is that your house?
This is at our house.
You had a half pipe at your house?
My dad built it, and he's not a carpenter.
Oh, nice.
So there would be like 2x4 sticking everywhere. At one point, the one side collapsed with kids on top of it.
Oh, no way!
Yeah, and we had to rebuild it. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. A guy, I remember the first guy that did an air on it, actually got above the coping. He came down and landed and just put a hole straight in the ramp because it wasn't wow. So it definitely was not up to code and definitely probably would not pass.
Yeah. Did you have any angry parents ever get mad at your dad for their kids getting hurt over there? No.
Thankfully, nobody ever got super hurt or anything, and
or at least you told them, hey, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of funny. We'd come home, if we went out or whatever, we'd come home and there'd be kids in our backyard skating the ramp, and nobody invited them over.
Oh, kids you didn't even know?
Yeah, kids we didn't even know.
Well, they just hopped the fence or something?
The fence.
Oh,
they
wow.
heard about it, and they'd be out there skating.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah, it was kind of...
Over by where my friend Brian and Tony lived, they had a neighbor that had it must have been I think it was an empty swimming pool.
Oh, okay.
That they used to skate in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I was never into... I was, but I could never do an ollie. I could never do tricks. None of that.
Yeah.
So I was always... thought people were cool that could, though.
Yeah. I was never good, necessarily very good at it. I just love doing it. And
okay.
Yeah.
But surfing more so. Would you say you enjoy surfing more than skating?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've always really loved nature, and so surfing added that element to it, where you're just immersed in nature, and so once I kind of found surfing, it felt like I found the golden ticket, so to speak, where it was
like a spiritual thing for you, kind of.
Yeah, it was very much like a way to connect with the Lord, but it also ticked the boxes of sport and adventure and all that. So,
right.
It was
So for me, it would bring me closer to the Lord too, because I'm scared to death of water and sharks. So I would be out there just praying nonstop. It'd be, Lord, just don't let me die out here,
Totally.
I can't think of a worse way to die than either drowning or getting eaten by a shark, and they're both out there. So I mean, it's but I can't swim either.
Yeah.
So that's probably a big part of it. I bet if I learned how to swim, I'd be less afraid of water. But
funny.
But it's just that idea of, even when I go out there up to my waist, I'm I can't see what's down there. That's scary. So these guys are out there on surfboards and stuff where it's feet and feet down.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me, man. It's you don't know if Jaws is down there getting ready to come up and eat your face,
Oh yeah. I mean, and it you think about it for sure. It's definitely not you don't think about it. I just try to keep it out of sight, out of mind.
Okay.
And try to push it away, you know. And when there's certain surf spots that are more sharky than others, and so when you're at one of those spots, then it's definitely on your mind. And if you're out there, say, by yourself or with only one or two other guys, then it's really on your mind.
Yeah.
And so, but you also learn to just, like I said, kind of push it to the back of your mind and not think about it. But there's also times where you just get that feeling something else is around here with me.
Right.
And that's when you need to listen to that feeling and just get out of there. Yeah.
That feeling. See, even you telling me about that feeling is freaking me out. If I got that feeling out on the water, I think I would be petrified. I wouldn't be able to move. I'd be easy shark bait, man.
Yeah.
That'd be it for me. That's no way. A feeling that there's something near you when you're out in the vast ocean where there could be anything in there, man.
Yeah.
That's scarier to me than outer space. I'm there's parts of the ocean that they've never even explored, know?
Yeah.
Scary, man.
Totally. That thought of there being things in the ocean that we don't know about is probably a little more scary to me than the sharks, because I know enough about sharks to know, especially great whites, they're not the human eaters that they kind of have gotten portrayed to be.
Only if you look like a seal, right?
Yeah. So and pretty much any time somebody gets attacked, it's mistaken identity.
Right. I'm sure.
And so
I'm sure. Humans probably don't even taste that good to them, I bet.
Yeah, so they usually always will bite somebody and then let them go. But the problem is their bite's so intense that it ends up either taking a limb off or killing somebody usually. So.
Well, you hit anywhere near a vital organ, you're done for,
Yeah. But at the same time, so I mean, I'm certainly scared of them, but I just try not to let that affect, my ability to enjoy the ocean. But there have been times where I've definitely gotten spooked and paddled in as quick as I could.
Have you ever seen sharks out there?
I have, yeah. I've seen. I've never seen a huge man-eater. I've seen smaller ones, and the only time I feel like I've seen a great white, it was a juvenile.
Okay.
In which is not necessarily a better thing.
It's probably still like 10 feet long, right?
Yeah, it was still solid, and they still can, do the same amount of damage.
Yeah.
But it wasn't quite as intimidating because I saw its shadow about maybe 40 yards away, and I was trying to figure out what it was at first because it when I say it's shadow, it just was like a dark figure in the water.
Oh my gosh, dude.
And
it's just freaking me out, man.
And so I saw it, and I was trying to figure out, okay, is that just like a shell? Did the bottom just get churned up and create a film down there or a shadow down there, or is that really an animal? And, and so a wave came and kind of took my view off of it for a second, and when things settled down and I was able to spot it again, it had cut the distance in half, so it was about 20 yards from me, and that's when I was like, okay, that's definitely an animal, and it got the shape of a shark,
of a megalodon.
So, and I was out there by myself. There were no other surfers.
Oh my gosh, dude!
So I was just like, okay, I'm going in, and I just turned around and started paddling.
But it didn't follow you?
No, it didn't follow me. I just got paddled in. They say if you do see something like that, not to. They always say don't
panic. Yeah. That's easy.
Totally. And so, but your heart just starts racing, and then you're supposed to try not to splat. You're supposed to try and paddle fast, but not make a big scene, not splash and stuff, because then that makes them. It triggers their hunting instinct where they see something like prey that's floundering, and so.
Or it's like the movie in the movies if you cut your finger. And now you're done for.
Right.
Because they're going to smell that blood and they're going to come after you.
I don't know how. I don't think that's. I mean, they have really good sense of smell. But they'd have to be in the area to smell something as small as a pin drop of blood. Okay. You know what I mean?
Are you saying the movies lie, Dan? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying that. No, I'm saying they exaggerate. Yeah.
It's not the whole truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'm so deathly afraid. I'm just thinking about, have you seen that movie Castaway with Tom Hanks?
Yeah.
Remember the part when he tries to make the raft and he gets out there and then he falls asleep or something?
Yeah.
I'll remember, to me, the scariest scene in that whole movie is when he wakes up and there's whales all around him.
Oh, really?
And now they're not trying to hurt him or anything, right? Yeah. But you just see this big it's all dark. It's at night, and the water's dark, and the sky's dark, and you see these big eyeballs.
Yes.
I'm like, this is like a horror movie for me. I can't even watch this scene. This is totally. I'd rather watch Freddy Krueger than this or something, you know?
Yeah. No, I agree. That being out in the open ocean like that with just nothing but a life raft, that would be terrifying. No matter.
Oh,
I would be
dude.
Absolutely terrified.
But you'd be out there with a surfboard,
which
is much smaller than a life raft. Explain that to me.
When you're surfing, usually waves. I mean, there are waves that are on outer reefs or whatever that are out in the open ocean, but you generally have to take a boat or something out there. So you have something with to some place to go.
Oh,
you
okay.
know? Whereas like if you were, you know, just floating in the open ocean, that would be, even as much as I love being in the ocean, that would be absolutely terrifying because, you can't. There's nowhere. You don't know what's underneath you.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to like be able to see what's around. You know, you're just. But surfing, for whatever reason, in my mind, it's different because the shore is usually close by, or at least a boat is close by, and so. You have a place to go if you need to.
How far out do you go past the pier sometimes, or do you?
Absolutely. The depending upon how big the swell is, the waves are.
But there's really no waves to ride out there, is there? I mean, don't you have to be closer to where they're gonna? I don't know anything about surfing, but usually when I see guys surfing, they're not out that far because where the break, is that what they call it? Or?
Yeah. Usually it doesn't get that big enough to break out past the pier very often, but when it does, it'll break way out past the pier, and depending upon how the sandbars form, that kind of really determines where the waves break is where the sandbars form.
Okay.
And so occasionally you'll get like a sandbar that will form out past beyond the pier.
Really?
And so then
interesting. Is that pretty rare though?
Yeah, that or it just has to be really big.
Okay.
And then when it gets really big, it starts breaking out further. And so, I think the last time I've surfed Pismo where it's broken out past the pier, where it was actually like really good, because it happens every winter where it does that, but it's usually not very good. When it gets big at Pismo, it usually all breaks at once. It's called the closeout. It'll just like the wave will just line up the entire length of the beach and just break all at once. And so there's no like corner to surf, if that makes sense. There's no part of the wave that's like really surfable. So the last time I saw really good breaking out past the pier was probably when I was in my around 19 or 20, like during that, I think it was the 97, 98 El Nino. Sandbar had formed probably about 100 yards past the pier.
Oh my gosh.
It just like...
You're almost to China at that point.
it would like break and it would peel both ways, like...
okay.
So like you
could go left or right.
Yeah, you'd have a left going towards the north side and a right going towards the south side. And like I said, I haven't seen it do that where it was actually really fun and good waves in probably 20 years. But it, like I said, every year it does break out there. It just usually is not very good when it does. Yeah.
Have you ever gone anywhere like big, like Hawaii or anywhere like that, and surfed?
Yeah. I used to go to the North Shore of Oahu every winter for surfing. I did that for about 5 or 6 years in a row. And,
just for fun, or did you ever surf professionally?
I surfed what I would say it definitely wasn't professionally. It was like semi-pro. Like if you remember the Santa Maria Indians, it was kind of like that status. I had sponsors.
Oh, nice.
But I was I never like made a living at surfing. It was never my profession, you know.
Right.
But I was thankfully, had some sponsors and was able to travel, and I was able to get in magazines and stuff like that.
Really? You got those up on your wall today to show?
I have one. I got on the cover of one.
Really?
So that was the which is funny. It wasn't even a surfing photo. It was a surfing photo, but I wasn't surfing. I was like hiking with a board and put it on a cover.
Okay.
And so,
what magazine was that?
It was called Deep. It was just a regional one. But that was the only one I think I have up in my house.
Nice.
But yeah, so I was definitely, it was a blessing from the Lord, and he blessed it more than my talent deserved, if that makes sense.
Right.
So he opened doors and did a lot through it, and it was a lot more than what my talent should have done.
Okay.
Naturally. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I did heavily pursue it for a long time. Was really into it, but even with the dedication and pursuit and all that, just naturally I was not as skilled as a lot of my peers and stuff. And
is that what eventually brought you out of that, or I mean, you still surf for fun today, right?
Yeah, I still surf a lot.
Okay.
And, still love it, and
but you didn't really pursue the professional.
I did, and it's kind of a part of, I guess, what my testimony or what the Lord's done in my life was in. It was like 2011. I had kind of started to create this niche in the surf world where I was surfing and I had some sponsors, but I was also writing articles for like surf magazines.
Okay.
And so I was getting paid for the writing aspect of it.
Okay.
And so I was going on trips with photographers, and getting the photos would make the sponsors like want to promote you or whatever, and then being able to write made the magazines want you to go on the trips or whatever, so that you could write the articles. So I was trying to create like this niche for myself, and I got invited on my first like professional legitimate surf trip to Nicaragua.
Oh dang.
And we were down there and we were getting photos, and I was going to write an article on the trip. And I remember we were staying at this really bougie condo, like right on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And in like about midway through the trip, I was on a couple of the guys on the trip were these big name surfers. One of them I grew up like seeing in the magazines, looking up to, and so part of me was like, this is the dream, like this is what I've been working towards. And I remember sitting on the deck one morning drinking coffee, and I just had this like feeling that I was missing something, that there was something a little off. And I was at that time solid in my walk with the Lord and pursuing him, and I was kind of like, Lord, what's going on? Like this is kind of my dream. This is what I've been pursuing. I feel like you've opened doors to get me to this point. Like this is where you've been leading me, but I just feel like there's something missing here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of put it to the back of my mind and kept going. And then a few days before the trip ended, I got like a message from my friend Brad, who I don't know. Do you know the band Dispatch? You're into music. You might know.
No, I don't think so.
So my friend Brad played in this band Dispatch, and he had gone down there.
Punk band?
It's kind of like, how would you describe it? Semi-punk, semi-like, I wouldn't say like, kind of sublime-ish.
Okay, like ska, reggae kind of stuff? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. He had gone down there years before and did like a concert down there for this community that's in this trash dump, and he started this ministry for this community in this trash dump. And so he eventually, like, because of, I guess, just randomly stumbling upon this community, he had a heart to like start this ministry. And so he started the ministry, and he happened to be down there at the same time we were like doing stuff for the ministry. And he messaged me and was like, "Hey, I heard you're in Nicaragua."
Oh, it wasn't a plan, like you guys didn't plan to go together. Okay.
No, yeah, it was totally random, or totally the Lord, like he was down there on his own. I was down there on my own doing the surf thing. And he messaged me. I think he might have seen like a post on social media or something, and was like, "Hey, this was like circa 2011, so social media was around."
Okay.
And so he was like, "Hey, I see you're down in Nicaragua. I just wanted to let you know I'm down here too." His ministry is called Love, Light, and Melody, and he's like, "We're down here doing stuff here. If you want to meet up, I'd love to show you guys what we're doing."
Oh, cool.
And so I pitched it to the members of the trip, the team, and I was just like, "Hey, my friend does this. Do you guys want to go check out and see what they do?" And so everybody's like, yeah, cool. We'll do it. The trash dump in the ministry is in Managua, which is the capital city. And we had to be there on our last day to fly out. And so they were like, why don't we do it on the day before we fly out? Well, we have to go to Managua then anyways. And so we did. And so when we met up with him, he took us into the heart of this trash dump. And the only way I can describe it is it was hell on earth. It was like the most devastating, apocalyptic scene I've ever seen. Like the mounds of trash for miles, and they were like smoldering. They would light it on fire, and then the like Central American heat and stuff. It would just cause this like permanent like smoldering haze, you know, and it just smelled terrible.
I was gonna say, I bet the smell was ferocious.
It was just ferocious, yeah. And they would like sift through the trash, try and find anything they could recycle to sell, or any sort of material they could use, resource they could use. And then they had this little like neighborhood that they had built using the materials from the dump, like trash. Wow. And so their homes were made out of trash, like just discarded wood or tarps. Like their roofs were like tarps. They'd use like, you know, plastic shopping bags that they would patch holes with those plastic shopping bags. So it was like patched together, and
And how many people would you say were living in that area?
Hundreds.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was just
kids and everything.
Kids running around barefoot, and like just a rag as like a diaper, and and he started telling us the stories of how like parents would prostitute their young children out to make money, and the kids, because of all the abuse that they received, would get hooked on. They somehow could create like a drug using, I guess, I don't even know, they called it like sniffing. So I guess just chemicals from discarded like paint cans and stuff.
Oh, okay. They would just
and so they
breathe
would
it
just huff it, and so you'd have, there were like 8, 9, 10-year-olds who were already addicted to drugs, who are already being prostituted out.
Right.
They had stories of cars pulling up, grabbing kids, leaving, and then hours later coming back and just dumping them back, throwing them out, and they'd gone and abused them, you know. And so just the most like horrendous place I'd ever witnessed, you know. And so Brad took us, and then kind of what one of the main things they were doing at the time was working with families in the dump to try to get their kids out. They had like an orphanage, or a children's home, and so they would work with the parents and say, hey, can we house your kids? We'll give them an education, we'll feed them, we'll get them out of the dump, and then when you're ready to, like, because a lot of the parents were drug addicts as well, obviously.
Right, it's just a cycle.
Yeah, it's just a cycle.
They were probably abused, drugs, all that whole deal.
Yeah, and so they would, it wasn't that they wanted to take them away from the parents, but they just wanted to get them out of the dump. So they'd work with, so the parents could go be with them and see the kids, but they kind of provided this like assistance where they wouldn't have to be subject to the things going on in the dump, and hopefully get them away out of the dump. And so he took us to that home, showed us all the kids, what they were doing, the education program they had going on, and so there was like a moment where it kind of all clicked, and because I was down there pursuing essentially self, like I was down there trying to promote myself, make myself great.
Is this after you had the conversation with the Lord about what's missing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Exactly. So this is you kind of trying to pursue that at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that conversation with the Lord was like in the middle of the trip at the beach in this luxury condo.
Right.
And at the time there was like a couple of people, like I guess they would be gardeners, for the condo complex, but they didn't. It wasn't like they had machetes, and so they were just They were mowing lawns by chopping with a machete. Wow. And I remember seeing them sweating out in the midday sun, and I'm sitting here in this luxury condo, worried about getting like a surf photo.
Right,
you know?
right. It's probably eye-opening for you.
Yeah, and so that's where I was starting. Like, Lord, why? You know, it feels like it should be the pinnacle, like this dream I've been pursuing, and yet it feels so empty. I see these guys sweating so hard, and it just doesn't. Something's not meshing. And then at the end of the trip, we go to the dump, and I felt like the Lord gave me those experiences and that time in the dump, and at the end of it, it was kind of like He said, well, you can use your life for two things, really. You can use it to promote yourself and to glorify yourself, or you can use it to like pursue me and glorify me and do, you know. And so you kind of have the two paths. You can go self-glorification or God glorification. And that's when it kind of clicked, and I was like, okay, Lord, I've realized that self-glorification, which is what I was experiencing at that like luxury condo, and it still felt empty, if that makes sense. There was still something missing. Right. And so I was like, okay, I just had this experience, and I realized it was empty. And so I want what you want. You know, I want to glorify you. I don't just want to glorify myself. And, and so then that became a turning point. I started using surfing and writing more as a means to like share the Lord and share messages of what I tried to cover, messages of hope and things that would have a positive impact and not just things that would promote myself or further my own ambitions, you know. And it wasn't like I quit surfing or quit writing. It wasn't like I felt like those were wrong. Like I felt like God had given me those things and opened those doors for a reason. But it was more the motivation behind it, you know.
Well, the whole thing could have been simply to teach you what He taught you through that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you had to get to a place mentally and emotionally, spiritually, for you to realize there was something missing.
Totally.
Before you could even, like, you could have went to Nicaragua 2 years prior to that, and it may not have had the same effect. You see what I'm saying? Because you might not have been ready to learn what you were supposed to learn there.
100%.
That's what I love about the Lord's timing. Is just He's, you know,
totally.
Always, it's almost like He knows what He's doing.
Yeah, you could say that, huh? Almost like He knows what He's doing. That's such a good point. And yeah, from there, He opened a lot of doors. That was it was like, I think the year after that, I started working on a book, and then that developed into a whole season of life of traveling and speaking with this book and stuff.
And you just wrote the one book, right?
I've written two. The second book is just a 30-day devotional. And so,
what's the one I have? The one that the kids have?
That was the first one. That's called When Oceans Rise, and that was that developed. That developed from kind of the platform from surfing, and there was a few. It was like the next year I had a season of life where I just within 6 weeks lost like 3 loved ones, and so
oh my gosh,
I was like kind of dealing with the grief and just kind of up like, Lord, what's going on with this? And this pastor back east that I knew in North Carolina, I for a small season lived on the Outer Banks in North Carolina.
That's somewhere I always wanted to visit.
Oh, really?
I haven't got a chance yet.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's
not in the summer though.
It's hot.
Yeah,
it's hot and muggy. It's like fall is amazing there. If you go, you should go in the fall.
I heard certain times of year it's one of the most beautiful places you could go.
Fall is amazing. It's incredible. But so that I got to be good friends with the pastor of a church back there when I was living back there, and so. And he was the writer. He's like a intellectual guy, scholarly guy, and so now he works at like a seminary, Asbury Seminary.
Okay.
But at the time I think he'd written a couple books already at the time, and so I was going to him with some of the I guess my grief to process some of it, and he just started encouraging me, saying, Dan, you need to just start writing this. You write for surf magazines, you need to like write for the Lord, and use this for like his plan. And he started encouraging me, saying this could help young people, like just write what you're feeling. And so that started like another 3-year process and the book's 7 chapters. So
oh wow!
It's not a big book, you know. It's
that's not, like half a year per chapter.
it's not a thick, hard read, but for me and the way I work, I'm definitely not. Definitely don't rush into things, but even writing it was a way of journaling. I was just journaling through stuff, and so only one chapter really deals with the grief, but it just kept developing into other stuff, like and so anyways, through that pastor's encouragement and just kind of keeping on me, hey, are you still working on it? And I was working a day job too at the time, so it wasn't like that was the only thing I was focused on. But, eventually it came to fruition, and that then that came out in 2015, and then that developed into a couple years of traveling and speaking and stuff.
Nice. I haven't read it yet. I have to read it.
Yeah, I just copy and pasted everything off Wikipedia.
Nice. Yeah, I have this huge list of books I need to read and things I need to check out, and I get all these, even through this podcast, bands I need to listen to, like all, it just, there's no time.
Totally.
Time sucks, man.
I know. I get handed books almost every week to read.
Oh, really?
I would love to.
You're thinking, I'm not going to read it.
And it's
I'm
just,
never going to get around to that.
The unfortunate thing is it's like, man, if I had nothing else to do but read, then I could catch up on all of them.
Yeah, you almost have to weed it out with, as far as like, if someone comes to me and they say, Ryan, you should check this book. This is the best book I've ever read in my entire life. Then I'm more likely to be like, okay, maybe I should check it. I mean, if it's somebody I know and I trust to have an opinion, or if it's a movie, it's like, no, dude, this is like hands down in the top 5 best movies I've ever seen.
Yeah. Exactly.
Then I'll make a point to check it out.
Yeah.
And sometimes I check it out. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? That movie was awful. I couldn't even get through it. Like, it was just, what did you like about it?
What's your favorite one?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, you learn that too, right? Yeah. You learn like certain people who you can trust with that stuff and some you can't, right?
Totally.
There's some people I know that if they tell me a movie's great, I'm going to hate it.
Really?
I just know it. It's all right. You got to see this movie. I'm thinking in my head, no, I'm not going to watch that.
Oh, you just convinced me.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because it's so often that they do that, and I watch and I'm like, dude, we just don't have the same taste in movies, which is totally fine.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and something like that is very subjective. And
right. Yeah.
It's like you can't say that you're dumb because you think a movie's great that I don't like. I mean, it's like, no, you might really like that movie. You know, I mean, I have movies in my own life, a lot of which some people haven't heard of, and it's like, I just love that movie. And somebody watched, like, dude, how can you even watch that movie? It's horrible. It's horribly made. I was like, dude, it's brilliant. What are you talking about? That's the best directing I've ever seen.
Dumb and Dumber is...
Well, hey, Dumb and Dumber is a great movie.
I agree.
That was one of those ones that a friend of mine, we used to watch it almost every day after school. And
same.
Dude, we just quote it back and forth forever.
Same. That's so funny.
And it's one of those things, like, for my kids, like, a lot of times when we finally get around to watching a movie when they're old enough, they're like, oh my gosh, Dad, I didn't realize how much of this movie you've been quoting my whole life, right? It's like they hear these quotes, like they look at me like, you always say that,
That's so funny.
Yeah. You mean to tell me you've had that extra pair of gloves this whole time? Yeah, we're in the Rockies. Just awesome.
That's
so good, man.
Funny. That's exactly how me and my friends were.
Oh, yeah?
I feel like that movie, and could be wrong, but that movie and like Napoleon Dynamite were kind of the first in their time to like make a movie about nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's really no plot.
Yes.
There's like nothing that no reason why you should be watching it.
Yeah, just funny characters and seeing what they're doing throughout their week, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it's like, I feel like Napoleon Dynamite is one of those movies where it's so quotable.
Yeah.
Right? But I always tell people, and I've talked to other people that have the same experience, like the first time you watch Napoleon Dynamite, you're trying to figure out what in the world you're watching the whole time, right? Yes. You're like, you got this look on your face like, oh?
Totally.
And then the second time you watch it, you're laughing your head off.
Yeah.
And the third time you watch it, you're quoting it to everybody you know, right? You're just going around to somebody that's seen it, oh yeah, hey, what do you do? I'll build her a cake or something, and you both start laughing, just all these different things, or like little seahorses. And
that is so true. Yes. It's so funny you say that. I vividly remember like the first time I saw it, thinking, what is the plot?
Yeah.
There has to be a plot
at
some point.
Right.
And like at the end of the movie, I was like,
you're like, no, there's not.
That was it? Like there's no plot? Right. What? Why was I But it was hilarious.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even from the first scene when he attaches that little action figure to the back of the string and he's dangling out of the bus, you're like, what am I watching? Like, what are you going to do today, Napoleon? What do I feel like? Gosh. It's just like, okay. Oh, man. And then they just keep adding characters. You got Kip and you got, just such a funny crew. Uncle Rico is one of my favorites.
Oh, totally.
My favorite scene in that whole movie, since we're on topic.
Exactly.
This is great, man. We're all over the place. My favorite scene in that whole movie is the scene where Napoleon's riding up on his bike. I think he has Kip with him. It might be when they came back from town, when he says, I need you to take me into town.
Yeah.
But they come back on the bike and Uncle Rico has the stake.
Yes.
And he hucks it and hits Napoleon right in the face. And it's the look on Uncle Rico's face after he does it. Like, he just thinks he's the best guy in the world. He's like, yeah, I nailed him. Like, just like... So funny, dude. And Napoleon's all ticked off. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Uncle Rico's like, yep, I still got it. Still got it. I should have went, what does he always say? We would have went state.
Yeah.
Not a doubt in my mind. That's so funny. And then years later, we watched, not years later, but we had watched Lost. Did you ever watch the show Lost?
Yeah.
So he's in that.
Is he really?
Yeah.
I don't know if I remember.
He looks totally different.
Really?
He's it's later in the season. Spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen Lost, but it's later in the season where they're talking about Dharma, and they have the whole city on the other part of the island, right?
Oh, right.
And that's when Ben comes in.
Okay.
And it's the scenes where it shows Ben when he was a kid. Well, Uncle Rico plays his dad.
Oh.
And he ends up being the guy. There's a spot, before they even get into all that, there's a spot where they come across that old van, that VW bus.
Yes.
And they see the was it a skeleton wearing? I think it is a skeleton that's wearing the uniform, the Dharma uniform.
Okay.
And it has a name on it. And I forgot what his name is now. But that's him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then when you see the
interesting.
flashbacks when Ben's a little kid, then you see his dad is played by him, Uncle Rico. So he's probably in a good 9 or 10 episodes.
Oh, that's
But
funny.
he looks totally different. Like you'd never... I didn't know it. I was kind of looking like, he looks kind of familiar. And then me and Bethany looked it up one time. I was like, oh my gosh, that's Uncle Rico.
That's so funny. Kind of makes me want to watch Lost.
Oh, dude. I'm excited because Addie and Ash are almost there.
Okay.
So Bethany and I watched it when it was on TV.
Okay.
Loved it.
Okay.
I told everybody I knew about it, and then of course back then you had to wait a week to see the next episode. So then we rewatched it with my 2 older kids when they were old enough.
Oh, cool.
We watched it through with them. So this show's still great. And now I'll probably rewatch it with them. But,
oh, that's cool.
But like some of my kids, they hated a lot of people hated the ending.
Yeah.
I loved the ending. I thought it was great. A lot of people, it's so dumb. But of course, a lot of people didn't get it.
Yeah.
They think that they were dead the whole time and the whole, you've seen the whole show, right?
No.
Okay. I'm not going to spoil it for you.
No, well, I skipped ahead and watched the last episode.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Because I wanted to find out what was going on.
Well, you were probably totally confused then, because
I was confused.
The ending makes no sense unless you have
the
the season to follow up to it.
I was confused. I thought this is so off topic.
Yeah, that's fine. It's great.
Yeah. So were they dead the whole time?
No.
So that wasn't. I was.
But that's what a lot of people thought.
Purgatory type
Right.
situation.
A lot of people thought that they all died in the plane crash originally,
Okay.
and the entire show was all them being dead.
Right.
And they're like spirits interacting or something.
Yeah.
We're watching 6 seasons of these people who were dead the whole time. That's not what happened.
Okay.
That all really happened. They all really crashed on the island. They all were still alive.
Okay.
They lived that whole 6 seasons. But the last episode is, and they explain it, right? And like probably the 2 or 3 episodes before that as well. But they all of course, none of this is biblical, of course.
Right, yeah.
But they all made a place where whenever they died, and they all died at different times, obviously, that they would all be able to meet together in this place. Right? So, and that's why I think there's one, I want to say Jack was one of the last ones to die.
Okay.
And he comes in and they're all in there and they're shaking his hand, they're giving him hugs and stuff. Oh, you finally made it. Right? So they've already been in this place for a while because in the timeline they already died at different times.
Okay.
And then he finally passes on and then he ends up in this place where they've all developed for them all to be together, which is totally dumb.
Right.
But it's not that they were all dead, right?
So did they get off the island and go and live their lives?
Yeah, all that really happened. Yes. And then they went back to the island, right? Because there's a whole thing where Jack's, well, we got to go back. He's like having these crazy, he's all alcoholic. He's trying to jump off a bridge. All this stuff's happening. And he's losing his mind. He's like, oh, it's telling me we got to go back. We got to go back to the island. And everybody's like, what are you, crazy? We got off the island.
So what was the Dharma stuff then?
Well, that was all real too. So that was prior to them. They were crashing on the island.
So that was like a research or what? Or
yes. And then there's that big chasm thing that they dig down into the ground with all the time travel and all that.
Okay, this is making more sense. I remember watching the last episode and being like, this is dumb. I'm glad I didn't watch the rest of the season.
Right, you should go back and watch it now.
Okay. I will.
Yeah, because it's if you pay attention, it makes sense. It really does make sense. I'm not saying I love the ending as far as like, oh, I would have done it this way.
Right.
But it was a decent wrap up. I mean, how are you going to wrap up a show like that?
Right.
And I don't think there's really any way to do it that's going to please everybody.
Yeah,
you know.
Totally.
But yeah, I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
But then, do you remember anything about like Jacob? Because the last season gets into all that too. Him and his brother. He's like the good and the bad, and they're the ones that like run the island. They're like in control. It's kind of like the God and the Satan character.
Oh, okay.
But they're brothers.
Okay.
It'd be like it's kind of plays on that belief where some people say that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers.
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever, you know. So it's kind of like that.
Okay.
And then they make you go back and forth with knowing which one's good and which one's evil.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's that whole mind game where it's like, well, wait a minute, he's supposed to be the good one, but yet he's doing seemingly evil things, but maybe for the good.
Right.
Right. You get into that whole thing. It's like, well, if you have to kill 3 people in order for 50 to survive, is that really an evil act you're doing?
Yeah.
It's tricky, right? So anyway, but yeah. Yeah, so
well, you may have convinced me to
you should check it out, man. Yeah. I got the whole thing on DVD if you can't find it on streaming anyway. But yeah, okay. So let's just finish off with. I know we've been all over the place, but just to finish off with, if you could tell me like maybe some like your top 5 favorite bands or
top 5 favorite bands. Yeah, I would say Paul Simon.
Nice.
One of them.
Okay. Well, hang on before we move on. Let's talk about Paul Simon.
Yes.
So, are you more like Simon and Garfunkel or like solo?
I like all of it, to be honest. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite like song by him or?
I love Graceland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice, dude. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That album's great.
Yeah. And I got in my, I would say 20s, I started getting into kind of folky, more acoustical stuff, and so that's generally what I listen to a lot now.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, pretty much anything in Paul Simon.
Yeah, I love. He's a genius songwriter.
He really is.
Whether it was with Simon and Garfunkel or not, he's
so
awesome.
Good. Yeah, and I have a bunch of when my grandpa passed, I got to keep. He had an old record player, and a bunch of old records and stuff, and so I have all these old Paul Simon records. And
nice.
Something about being on vinyl.
It's just different, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool.
It's a timepiece. It brings you back. You know, it's awesome.
And and it does. There's some nostalgia for me because my dad was really into him when I was a kid.
Okay.
And so when I hear certain songs, it kind of reminds me of certain times in my childhood. You know, where my dad would have been listening to him on the radio or whatever.
Yep. And that's the best, right? Because that just it's so nostalgic and it just takes you right back there. I love that about music.
It's amazing how it does that. So yeah, him. Lately, I've been really into Gregory Alan Isakov.
Never even heard of him.
Yeah, he's like a folky guy.
Okay.
And then,
is he newer?
He's, I would say, I mean, not new. He's got a number of albums out, but probably just been. In the last decade or so, I would say.
Okay.
And then I like Josh Garrels.
Oh my gosh, dude! Look at.
Oh, that's so funny.
Dude, I literally just wrote it down because I was going to ask you if you've heard of him.
Yeah.
As soon as you mentioned this folksy guy. Oh my gosh, dude.
Funny.
I'm tripping out now that you would actually say that right after. I literally just finished writing it. And you said his name.
That's hilarious.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yes, Josh Garrels. I love Josh Garrels.
The way I came across him was I was doing a tour on the East Coast I used to work for a surf ministry called Walking on Water. They would produce like Christian surf videos of professional surfers giving their testimonies and surf footage, and then they'd go and premiere them everywhere. Okay. And so I worked for them for a number of years. Then after I was done working with them, they produced another video, and they were doing like an East Coast tour with it. And this clothing company that I had, that I surfed for and had a relationship with, was sponsoring the video. So they were wanting a presence on the tour. And so they basically had worked it out to where I was going to go on this tour as kind of their ambassador, but also because I had this relationship with Walking on Water. And so I get on the tour, and they have a couple musicians there opening for the videos, and one of them's this guy named Josh Garrels.
Oh, nice!
And I'd never.
So,
heard
what
of
year
him
was
before.
this? Was this pretty early in his career then?
2007, yeah.
Okay.
2007.
Okay.
And so
that's pretty early.
Yeah.
I'd say his first album was what, like 2003, maybe?
Something. Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And so I'd never heard him before.
Yeah.
And him and his wife were on the tour, and they were super nice people. And his wife. Her dad was like a missionary with I think Wycliffe, and some of my parents' best friends were missionaries with Wycliffe. Okay. So there was like that connection. I started talking to them a lot on the tour, and super nice people. And
so you got to meet him?
Yeah, and
that's awesome.
So then hearing him on the tour, I'm like, man, this guy's really good. And
such a range too.
No idea. Yeah. And so then. Ever since then, I've been a big fan.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy where I see him in interviews and I watch his, in his performances. He's so genuine to me.
Yeah.
Like, he's the kind of guy what I would love to meet. I would love to sit down and do this with him, right? Just have a conversation and talk about stuff, because he seems like he would be so cool to talk to. And I don't remember the name of the song. A friend of mine asked me if I'd heard of him. This is probably 10 years ago now. And I said, no, I never heard of him. And he showed me, there was a couple videos he showed me to show his range. Okay. And there was the one song, children's song, maybe it's called. Pretty early on. Yes. But then he had one that was, it was rap.
Yes, totally.
And I forgot the name of the song, but it was a live performance. And he's like wearing the beanie, and the dude's like 6'5" or something. He's huge.
He's tall.
He's just monster guy. He's this tall guy, and he just starts rapping. And it wasn't that he was like such a good rapper, but the way that what he was saying and his flow with what he was saying, I was like, oh my gosh. Totally. And it penetrated, right? Like it was deep. These lyrics. Yes. Totally. And then, and since then I've been a big fan. I have pretty much his whole catalog at this point. And there's one, I want to say it's off the Home album. And I always forget the name of the song, but it's the one that's got, his voice gets really high.
Arrow? Yes, I think it's called Arrow.
Yeah, dude. Oh my gosh, that's my all-time favorite Josh Garrels song. Yeah, it just gives me chills whenever I listen to it.
His lyrics are amazing.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that I was really impressed by. Was same thing. I've had a number of times where on his albums there was one album with, I think it's called like Zion, Babylon and Zion or something. But the lyrics just like cut to the core, and it was just like, man, he's not just like writing to fill up space, you know what I mean, or to make us like a verse. He's like writing things that are in his heart.
Yes.
And
that's what I mean. He's just genuine.
Yeah.
He's just got this natural talent.
Yeah.
And he's just pouring it out into music.
Totally.
It's not scripted. It's not. I mean, it's scripted in a sense, but it's him.
Yeah. Totally.
Right. And that's why. And he's got this confidence.
Yeah.
Where he can stand up there and grab the mic and start rapping.
I know.
Or he can sing a song like that one that I was just trying to sing, where he just gets all high voice. Where some people is like, dude, why are you singing like a girl?
He's a good skater too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was like, that was the other thing that I was impressed. He was such a contradiction in terms of like he rapped but he skated,
right?
He, like, in my mind, all these like things that were exclusive, or what, like if you were a skater you're a punk,
right,
or whatever,
right.
you know,
yeah, all the stereotypical stuff,
all the stereotypes, and I just remember like him being very just like you said, confident in who he was, but humble and not worried about it, like he wasn't trying to fit into some box, I'm a folk singer, I'm a Christian singer. He just like,
I am who I am. That's what I mean. He's the coolest guy I've never met.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
I totally think so. Like, I think if I ever get the chance someday to meet him, I mean, he's just so cool. You know?
And he really, I mean, that was 15 years ago. Although he did play a couple shows in Slow. And,
oh, really?
In, I want to say it was not too long after that tour, so it was probably like 2008, 2009.
Okay.
And I met up with him then.
Did he remember you?
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, it wasn't that long.
Okay.
You know? And we were in this like RV like caravan thing for probably 6 weeks together. And there was only maybe 10 of us, 12 of us. So it was a small group, and there was you got to know everybody
awesome.
probably more than you wanted to.
So that's what's got to happen. So if he ever plays anywhere close again, we got to go together.
Totally.
So you can be like, hey, this is my friend Ryan. He's a big fan. And I can still be going.
I don't. Well, see, that was so long ago.
You think he'll not remember you?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't think I made that good of an impression.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome.
But he was a very humble guy and genuine, just who he was, and genuine. And what I appreciated was, he was never one to try to like fit into a mold or be someone he wasn't. You know, he was just, like I said, and you can see it on his music. He'll sing like a folk song. He'll sing like a hymn.
Oh, right.
And he'll sing a rap song all on the same album.
Yeah, that's why it's so exciting whenever he's got a new one coming out, because I really don't know what to expect.
Totally, yeah.
I mean, even as a full, what was it one? Chrysaline?
Yeah.
I'm probably saying that wrong.
Yeah.
But that one to me was totally different in style than the one before it.
I agree, yeah.
So it's just, it's so neat because you don't know what he's going to do. And then I think the one after that was nothing but hymns.
Yeah.
Very churchy kind of songs, you know.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah. So anyways,
okay.
He's definitely become one of my favorites.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Paul Simon, Josh Garrels.
What else
we got?
Simon, the Gregory.
Gregory, Alan, Isakov.
I'm trying to think who else do I listen a lot to lately. I love old hymns.
Okay.
And so I would say just like old hymns, as long as they're done good, you know.
Right. Do you like the old traditional sound of the hymns, or is it more the lyrics? Like, do you
the lyrics?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't mind like if a contemporary service changes it into more contemporary in sound, but the lyrics are still the same.
Sometimes, obviously, depending on the mood. Sometimes, like, there's something about the old hymns done in the traditional way that just gets you.
Like,
know?
Be Thou My Vision. That's got to sound Irish. It just has to.
Yeah, totally.
Or Scottish,
like
or whatever that was.
Favorite.
That's my all-time favorite. Yeah, that one.
It's like, I just think that if any of my like life pinnacle moments, I just want that to be played.
Right.
Like know, wedding.
Yeah.
Death.
Right.
Right. That song.
Well, it reminds me when Paul said to live as Christ and to die as gain.
Totally,
right. I mean, that's really what it's all about. Your whole life should be about this, and your whole death should be about this.
Right.
But it's not. Right. We have so much stuff going on. We're focused on all these other things that don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Totally. Yeah.
But that's just human nature, I guess. You know.
But there's something about those old hymns that are just like, they feel like they're written from conviction, like written from actually living it out, and then like you said, they're there's something so pure and like simplifying about them, I guess is how I would describe it. It just like simplifies it down to this is what's important.
Right. When I describe the difference between hymns lyrically and most traditional worship music, and this isn't a shot at anything, but it from what I gather, a lot of times the lyrics from a hymn is more about who God is.
Totally.
To where a lot of the new contemporary lyrics are more about, look what God's done for me.
Totally.
Look how he makes me feel.
Yes.
Right? And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people are going into a worship service looking for.
Yes.
What's God going to do for me during this worship service?
Yes.
No, it shouldn't be like that. Yes, he is going to do things for you through it, sure. But your focus should be on who he is.
Yes.
Right? Not what he can do for you.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Yes.
Right.
I have a friend who plays worship, and we have this conversation all the time.
Okay.
One of the things, and not to point fingers or pass judgment on anybody or their worship preferences or anything, but I think one of the things that make like old hymns so much more powerful is, like you said, they're God focused,
right?
Whereas so much of modern worship, it has a self element to it.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
That it really detracts from the essence of worship, because it's like you said, look what God's done for me. Look how I've improved, or look how I feel better, or whatever the case may be. There's like some sort of self element to it that detracts from true, what, in my opinion, might take it or leave it, but true worship is God focused, so
which is okay, because it's not like Jesus ever said like deny yourself or anything.
Sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, so old hymns, and then I don't know, let's see, number 5.
Let's throw one more at me. Let's see if you can get one more for me.
I would say Dogwood.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go back to good Dog. I've been listening to them lately, like just on a nostalgia trip, and I've just been so into it.
Never gets old.
I was like, oh man, I forgot how. Just getting all pumped in the car.
Dude.
And,
sometimes I can't drive when I listen to them, because it's so, because I'm definitely a sing-along person.
Totally,
and especially in the car when I'm by myself, people always ask me if I play any musical instruments. I say, well, no, but I can play a mean steering wheel.
I was gonna say.
I can go do a drum solo on a steering wheel, like right along with whatever band I'm listening to. It's awesome.
That's so
funny. I sing along. I get like big time. Sometimes my voice, I can't even talk when I get to work sometimes, especially like something like Dogwood's got such a raspy voice. Have you ever seen them live?
Yes.
Okay.
They came. So did you know that Dan and Dave?
Yeah.
So they came and played up here.
Yeah, I was at that show.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Okay.
That's so
cool.
funny. Yeah.
So. I've seen them 3 times, I believe. The first time was at a place called Lumbago's in Napoleon. It was a bar.
Okay.
And that one I was brand new into Christianity. I want to say. See, I get them all blurred. I might be getting this wrong, but that might have been the night. I know Incomplete played. Do you know Incomplete?
Yeah.
They're from Ventura, I believe.
I vaguely.
And a lot of people haven't heard of them because they're more local, but they're great. They were great. They're not together anymore. And then I want to say, this is where I might be getting wrong, because I saw another show with Arthur, which is so that's a side project of MXPX.
Oh, okay.
It was all 3 of the MXPX guys.
Oh, funny.
But they played different instruments. Like I think Mike Carrera played guitar.
Okay.
And then Tom was the drummer, maybe.
Okay. Oh, funny.
Maybe Yuri wasn't in it. I don't remember, but it was some of the bands, and it was they had one EP and then they had one full length eventually, but only the EP. It's very mellow.
Okay.
It's great songs, but it's definitely not the punk rock you're used to from MXPX. That's kind of a side thing. But I want to say it was those 3 bands that played that show. Then I saw them again at the show you're talking about, where the One Way guys had put that one on. And if I remember correctly, that was the night that the Israeli punk band was there. Man Alive, I think they were called.
Yes, I think you're
They were
right.
one of the openers,
and
they killed it too. I had never heard of them before that night, and we ended up getting their CD and the whole deal. I was like, dude, you guys are awesome.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, and I don't remember who else played that night, but anyway, So do you have A favorite album by Dogwood, or it's hard, huh?
Yes, I have a favorite song. What's the and now I'm gonna totally space on it.
Do or Die?
It's the one where he's like singing about sailing.
All Hands on Deck?
All Hands on Deck.
Okay, that's older. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's like my all-time favorite.
That's from is that the Preschool Days album or the?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I remember it's so funny. So much of music for me is the memories that it gives me.
Okay.
And I remember like taking a road trip up to Santa Cruz with a couple friends for a surf contest, and we were like blasting that album the whole time. So
that's great, man. That's prior to Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
They weren't even on Tooth and Nail yet. So I hadn't heard him at that point.
Okay.
My first, I had never heard him until More Than Conquerors.
Well, and it's funny because the cassette I had, I believe it was like a copied one from a friend that had copied it.
Okay.
You know? And yeah, it was like, and you kind of felt like you're like, oh, I'm on to something that nobody knows yet.
Right.
Know?
There's something cool about that, right? Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
And then when they get big, you're like, they suck. I hate those guys.
Sold out.
Yeah. Exactly. But no, I mean, I don't feel that way, of course. But there is something cool about that.
Totally.
Just like having this band you can show to people that they've never heard of.
Totally.
You know? It's like, check these guys out, you know? So that's cool. It's hard for me to pick a favorite album, but I mean, I liked them all the way up till Seismic, which was their last one. And a lot of people didn't love that album. I love that album.
I don't know if I ever heard their album, to be honest.
That one's it's got Faith on it.
Okay.
I have a faith no one believes.
Oh,
I love a God no one can see.
Yeah. Okay.
That one, that's probably the big single on, but that whole album's great, dude.
Yeah.
And then, it's so good.
To be honest, I never really heard an album of theirs that I wasn't like into, you know?
Yeah.
And some of it could just be like, just feeling like like I said, you're onto something that was like not mainstream, and you're like, oh, this is good.
Right.
But anyways, I was a fan for sure.
And still to this day, that's what's cool.
Yeah.
That's important to me, is a band that can last.
100%,
like if you can still listen to them 20 years later and still just totally dig it.
I was just thinking about that the other day. I was like, there's so many people I've listened to where I'll be like, oh, they're good, and I'll think they're like great for like a year or two.
Yeah.
And then I'll start being like, I'm kind of over it. And then 5 years down the line, I'm not listening to them at all.
Right.
And don't even really like them.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how there's certain bands that will last that, through all that, where you're like, okay, I've been listening to them my entire life, and I'm still not tired of them.
Right.
Right. It's just interesting how that is.
Yeah, and there's lots of bands like that for me where I'm so into it.
Right.
Like they're the greatest band in the world for like 6 months.
Yeah. Totally.
And then after that, it's like, who?
Yeah, totally.
And then maybe 10 years later, I'll try to listen to it again. I'm like, why did I like that? Right? It's like, this isn't even good. Like, what was I going through in my life that this sounded good to me at the time? But I was so into them.
So, yeah.
Like, the greatest ever. Real quick, I'm going to mention this.
Yes.
If you've never heard of, you may have heard of Children 18-3. Have you ever heard of that band?
Sounds a little familiar, but I don't.
That's probably... between Dogwood and them is probably my favorite as far as Christian punk bands go. And what's really cool about them is there are 3 homeschool siblings.
No.
Yeah, two guys and a girl, and the one of the guys and the girl share vocals, like lead vocals, which I love that.
That's
if there's ever a band that has 2 singers, especially if it's a male and female, where they sound very different, and their harmony, or I don't know if you can call it harmony. I don't know how to explain it. So like he'll be singing, and she'll be doing a background vocal that doesn't go along with his.
Okay.
I mean, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, she's not singing the same words he is. She'll just be like going, and he's like singing something over here. Dude, it's just phenomenal.
Cool. That's awesome.
So if you've never checked them out, listen to them for sure. Children 18-3. They have 4 albums. Second one's my favorite, but I would start with the first one if I were you. But it's very punky. Some of the songs are very, like, heavy, and then they'll have some kind of like slower ones. They have a couple reggae sounding songs in there. But it's just so good, dude.
That's awesome.
But most people have never really. They played them on Radio U. That's when I first heard them. They had a song called "Oh So Fond of Dying," I think it's called. But yeah, it's good.
awesome.
Yeah, so you have to check it out.
Cool.
Cool, man. All right, well, you want to move on to some political discussion?
Yeah.
You seem like a real political guy. You
super political.
You're on the front lines of the activist movements that are all across the country.
Always out there. Always out there.
So this is gonna be interesting because, like, you're one of the most. I mean, obviously, I don't know you that well, but what I know of you, you're like one of the most laid-back, non-controversial people I've ever met. So, do you have like political opinions on things, or do you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I do. I try not to let them influence the way I interact or see people. Because I feel like politics are, to be honest, they're necessary, but they're often a distraction. And the danger I see happening in our society is that we've created like the identity politics. I think that's a very dangerous thing, because what happens is when your politics become part of your identity and who you are, if somebody disagrees with your position on a policy, you feel invalidated in who you are. You're feeling like they're disagreeing with you existing.
Right. Right, exactly.
So from a spiritual perspective, I see that as such a intentional attack from the enemy to create people's identity in their politics. Because it creates that dynamic within society. And so I try not to let it like become part of who I am. I certainly have opinions on politics. But yeah, it's, especially as believers, I think we've got to be children of God first, believers first.
Well, we all know Jesus was a middle-class Republican, so.
Obviously.
Some people actually believe that.
I know.
It's like, dude, I don't think so. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's again the danger of it. And on the flip side, like on the Christian side or whatever, that is a danger where you begin to create God in your image. You know, like you think Jesus agrees with everything you agree with. And, that might not be the case.
Right, exactly. And that we need to line ourselves up with him, not the other way around.
Exactly.
And I think I saw a lot of that when Trump first got into office in 2016, and it was, you know, and I'm half and half with Trump. Like, I think a lot of things he did were great. I think a lot of things he did and said were not great. And I've been very vocal about that. People that know me know that. But there was like this whole sect of people that came out of that were like, you know, they always coined the term the never Trumpers, right? Never Trumpers. But then there's also another side that's the always Trumpers. Right? It was like they treated him like he walked on water, and he just everything he said was great, and they tried to spin it in a way that made him sound good. It's like, no, what he said was really bad.
Right.
Just admit that, and that's okay, right? There's no politician that's going to be so flawless that they're not going to. They all have their flaws, of course, and I think Trump has a lot of flaws. So but it's interesting how people went so in with it. But I think a big part of it was because he was offering something that has never been offered before, in a sense, right? He's like, look, I have all the money in the world. Nobody can buy me off. I'm here for the middle class. I'm here to take care of the. And people are like, you know, it's like totally cool, you know.
100%. He offered the average American a certain amount of hope in their leader, like in their government leader, that has never been offered before. Because, like you said, he was wealthy enough to where he couldn't be bought, and he's obviously, I'll say, confident enough to not care what people think.
Cocky's a good word.
He obviously doesn't. So he'll say whatever to whoever. He's not playing like the politics game of we're in the same teams. You know, even if we might be political enemies, we're both like elites, and so I'm gonna I'll only treat you so bad because we're, you know, I think the average American sees politicians as these elites who really don't care about them.
Because most of them are. really.
Exactly, totally.
Right.
And so I feel like what gained Trump so much popularity was that he presented, and maybe he really was on the side of kind of the average American. Like, I don't know, I'm not going to judge him personally. I agree. I appreciated a lot of his policies that he implemented. I myself, his personality, it clashed with mine, the way he would interact with people. There were times I loved it,
right,
because he said things that like needed to be said, and you're like, yeah, finally somebody. Right. But then there's times where I hated it, where I was like, oh, how could you, like, even if you disagree, like, that's so not cool to, like,
it's almost like a jab as opposed to just saying something true that's maybe gonna make people mad because it's true,
right,
as opposed to, oh yeah, your mom is fat or something, you know. It's like, what are you throwing a your mom is fat in there for? Like, you just said something really good, and you followed up with something like that. It's like, what do you sound like a 5-year-old, like, what are you doing?
And for me, I was thinking, man, he could have, and he could, I mean, who knows, like, there's so many factors in politics that I think are taking place behind the scenes, but I just felt like he could have done, had he had a little bit of self-control over the way he interacted, over how he treated people.
Right.
Like,
he could still be in office.
Yeah, it could have been so much different.
I think what killed him, to be honest, this is my honest opinion, I can't remember which debate it was with him and Biden. I don't know if it was the first or the second, but it was one of them. And all he had to do was just let Biden talk.
Yeah.
Biden would have shot himself in the foot over and over and over and over, but he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And he just kept throwing little quips out there and insults and all this stuff. And it's like, you sound like a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think even a lot of the right-leaning people that were Trump supporters at the time, they saw that and they were like, okay, this guy's got to go. You know, we need to try something new. You know, because we look at that and we think, well, what's going to happen? He's going to go over to China. He's going to call the president of China mama's fat or something.
Right.
And he's going to start a war and all, you know, because he just, and that's the thing about Trump is like, he cannot take a criticism without going back at him, right? With some, and it's not even a good reply half the time. Again, it's just, and I always use an example whenever I talk to people. I always know that the conversation is over when somebody calls somebody else a name.
Right.
Because that to me says you do not have an answer to what has just been raised to you. Like, you know, I've said, let's say I bring something up and say, well, what about this? And they say, well, Ryan, you're ugly. Okay,
but
cool.
You didn't answer the
exactly,
question.
Which tells me you don't have an answer to that question, and you don't know. You can't just admit you're wrong or admit you don't have an answer because it hurts your pride. So all you can do is lash out with some insult. Right.
Totally.
So whenever I see that happening with Trump, it's just, come on, man. It just makes you look really bad. Just don't do that. Just. You know?
I agree. Yeah, and I think that was for me. That was it was frustrating because there were times like like I said, so many of his policies, I was thankful for it, you know? Like, but then there would be times where he would have an interaction with somebody and it was just like, oh man, how am I supposed to like defend you, you know?
Yes.
But
and you almost feel like you have to defend him for some reason, but you don't.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
And that's the thing is you can't, especially as voters, like we don't get to pick who runs for office. You know what I mean? Like essentially the majority of people wouldn't vote for any of the candidates that get put up.
Right.
And so for me, I try not to buy into the individual, you know. I just try to look at, okay, whose policies are going to allow me to live my Christian faith the most freely, and try and vote in that manner. So like if this guy, his policies are going to allow me to live my Christian faith the most freely, then I'm going to vote for him. I mean, in reality, like, it doesn't matter who's in there. We're going to, especially as believers, we're going to live our Christian faith regardless.
Right.
But obviously you want somebody that's going to be, that's not going to make it harder or more dangerous for you.
Who's not going to kill you or throw you in prison for doing so. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I vote. I'm like, try to look at each guy and determine, okay, who's going to allow me to live out my Christian faith the most freely,
right,
and vote in that direction.
And you wouldn't say, well, I shouldn't put words in your mouth. You would say, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not saying that you want a government that imposes Christianity on other people,
right?
But just one that's open to it the same way it would be open to Hinduism or Islam or any other religion in this freedom of religion country that we're living in.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, and this is such a for me, it's such a two-pronged argument, and so America has been a great experiment. You know, I don't think there's been another country that has allowed, that was founded on this idea of there being a creator, and therefore we were subject to a creator, and yet we're not going to impose it upon we're going to allow everybody to determine what they want to believe.
Right.
And so you have this kind of value system of a Judeo-Christian value system, but without the imposing it upon other people.
Right.
And so it's a very it's a dichotomy for sure, because you have, like, for me, obviously I want a leader that's gonna lead with Christian values. So all their policies, all their decisions are going to be informed by their Christian faith. But with that said, knowing that our leaders are being chosen by the general population's vote, you can't create a government that imposes a certain belief system, because like what we're seeing now, if you get a government in there that doesn't have Christian values, then it gives them the power to impose like non-Christian values upon you.
Yes.
And so there, it's very fragile, because if you don't have some sort of Judeo-Christian value system, you're gonna essentially decline into chaos, because especially, as believers, obviously, we know that there has to be an objective truth, and if you don't have truth, then you have kind of the chaos that we see our society declining into right now, where objective truth is not believed anymore.
Right.
And so And then once you go there, then who's to say what's right and wrong? Who's to say you can't murder somebody? Who's to say you can't do all these things that are inherently wrong?
Right.
But if there's no objective truth, if there's no right and wrong, then who's to say?
Right.
It's just your opinion against my opinion.
Exactly.
And so So that's where it gets super complicated. I guess to go back to your question, I don't believe that Christians in any means, by any sense of the term, should impose our Christianity or Christian values on anybody. I think that just like God doesn't impose his will on us, like gives us free will, gives us the opportunity.
Unless you're Calvinist.
To choose, yes. another rabbit hole. Which, I'm not, I think with the Calvinism, I'll just say side note, I think they're both true.
Parts of both.
Parts of both. I don't think you can have one without the other. And I think that God is more complex than we understand, and so it's okay if we don't fully understand it. I think we have free will. I think he's sovereign, I guess.
I do too. I think that's That's the Arminian standpoint, really.
Yeah.
Like we don't, and that's when I get into debates with Calvinists, it's not like, if they'll say, well, you don't believe in the sovereignty of God, it's like, well, no, yes, I do.
Yeah, right.
I just think it means something different than what you think it means.
Totally.
Right? It's not the word that's the problem, it's the meaning behind the word, right?
And I heard, do you know Chuck Nissler is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I love Chuck Nissler, and I was listening to...
Passed away now, right?
Yeah, he's passed. I was listening to a sermon actually yesterday, and he was explaining, it was on Luke 22, and he was talking about Judas, the betrayal and stuff.
Oh, right.
And he was like, people often want to put God in the midst of time. And so they want to say that God, because it was prophesied, long before Judas did it, that he was going to do it.
Right.
And because God knew that Judas was going to do it, that somehow God made Judas do it.
Right. Well, then they bring in the fact that it says Satan entered Judas.
Right.
And it makes it sound like he was forced into it or something, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And in essence, they're putting God in time and saying that, but if God's outside of time and he sees the beginning and the end at the same point, then that all that means is he sees what you're going to do. Like he sees what you're going to choose. And therefore, if he prophesies before you choose it, that you're going to choose it, it doesn't mean he's making you choose it. He's just saying he saw it before it happened.
Right.
And
and that's kind of my stance too.
Yeah.
Right. I have a really close friend who's a Calvinist, and we talk about this all the time. But that's kind of the difference, right? So you and I might say something like that, and say, I totally believe that God knows, who's going to receive him, who's going to reject him. He knows, I was like, I always tell my kids, I was like, he knows who you're going to marry before you're even born, you know?
Yeah.
He knows all that, but that doesn't mean he's making it happen. It doesn't mean he's, to where the Calvinist determinist viewpoint would be, no, if you're saved, it's because God determined you to be that way. It's not because you chose him. It's not because you received him. It's not because you chose to believe that. It's just you were one of the ones that he decided to say, boom, all right, saved. All you others, you're on your way to hell. See you later. You got no shot. And that's what's hard for guys like you and me to grasp.
Because I think of that argument, then I think of Adam and Eve in the garden, and I'm like, well,
the very beginning.
Yeah, at the very beginning. If that were the case, then does that mean that God made Adam and Eve sin? In which case, why was the devil even there tempting? Because it wouldn't be a temptation, if that makes sense. You know, like if it was predetermined.
Yes.
Why is he called the tempter?
Exactly.
Because it wouldn't be even a temptation.
Exactly.
And so there's so much about that where it's like God is sovereign, and he does at times, I believe, impose his sovereignty, meaning like there's times where he will intervene and be like, okay, I'm stopping this car from hitting you, like, or whatever the case may be. But in terms of our free will, you have to have free will in order for there to be love, because otherwise
otherwise it's robots.
It's robots. It's and there's no
and that's the whole thing, right? Like when it comes to like something horrific like a school shooting, and of course the atheist or the non-believer always comes at you and say, how can you believe in a God that allows something like that to happen? And if you say, well, he didn't allow that to happen, then, well, you're taking the power away from God, right? If he's all powerful, which we know he is, he can stop that at any point. So the question is, why didn't he? Why in one case did he allow 50 kids to die? And in another case, he had it so that the cop got there and shot the perpetrator before they even got into the school. We don't have answers to those questions. And maybe we never will. But that's where the sovereignty of God comes in. You say, no, but I trust that he knows what he's doing. If I'm going to try to play God and say, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, then you go into Job. Who are you? Who made your mouth? Who made this? You can't argue against God. I mean, we can struggle with it. And I'm not saying that anybody's sitting there going, well, this is God's will. I sure am glad. I'm glad these 50 kids are gone. No way. I mean, I can't even imagine being the parents of one of these children. You know, I mean, I would have a struggle with faith after that. I'm sure
100%.
And I think that's kind of where you see the strength stay or not, because a lot of people would flee away from that.
And I think it's good to wrestle with those things.
Of course.
I think it's good to wrestle with that subject and come to the conclusion that, hey, I don't have all the answers, you know. That's a healthy place to be. It's unhealthy to assume you know more than God knows, you know. And
I'm glad I don't know more than God knows.
Totally.
Because if I did, I'd be scared.
Totally.
I don't want a God that's like me.
Right, exactly.
We'd all be doomed,
totally.
you know. So
there's so many times where there's things that happen where you're like, God, why did you do this, or why did you allow this, or why didn't you intervene?
Right.
And that's okay. Like those are healthy questions to ask. It becomes unhealthy when we begin to think we know better than God, because oftentimes those things happen and he will give us an answer. It might not be the answer we want, or it might not be in the timing we want, but in the process of pursuing an answer from him, we're getting closer to him, or he's revealing more about himself. So there's the aspect of spiritual growth that comes out of those things, where all because we're pursuing an answer, if that makes sense,
right?
You know, and it's definitely a rabbit hole. And the politics of it, I guess, going back to the politics, I fear for if it becomes our country. I fear if our country becomes such that like we regulate morality, because or legislate morality, I should say, because certainly we want to have there's like I said, objective truths, that we need laws that keep people from murdering, keep people from robbing, things like that. But when you get into some of the issues of faith, if you get a government that has the authority to tell you what's right and wrong, then that becomes a very dangerous place for Christians, because they can then tell you that Christianity is wrong, and you're not allowed to believe it,
or you're not allowed to teach your kids it. Totally. Pastors can't preach from the pulpit. Like there was a few years back, quite a few years ago, where there was a thing going around. I don't know if it was a bill they were trying to pass or whatever, that was saying that pastors could not speak negatively against homosexuality from the pulpit. And the argument back was like, well, what if we're preaching in a section of scripture that says it? I mean, I'm not saying every sermon should be some kind of hate speech against the gay community, but if you get to a section of scripture that says it, what are you supposed to do? Skip over it? And then these proponents would say yes. Just strike that out of your Bible. You know?
And that's where as like Christians, we have to do what the Word of God says, not what man says. You know, and that's what I mean. Like, it becomes a sticky subject where if you want to make Christianity like a political governing body, so to speak, or like instituted as part of our government.
Like the church should be running the country. Or something.
Like that becomes, for me, a slippery slope, because all it takes is one person who gets into office who changes their mind and says, you know what, I don't believe in Christianity, I believe in this, and because all the laws are in place that state that government has this sort of control and authority, I can change it and to mean this, and then you're stuck with the kind of reverse effect.
Which was the whole, I mean, that was the whole point behind church and state, is the government was not supposed to involve itself within the church. But now everybody turns it around and says, no, the church shouldn't be able to say anything about the government, or you shouldn't be able to have prayer in schools, and you should. It's like that's not what it meant. It was the other way around. It's like
100%. And so, with that said, I think as Christians, it's our responsibility to be involved in our communities, in our politics, and being used by God within those fields, because then that means the more Christians that are involved, that means the more godly influence is going to be over. There's going to be over society. And so I think it is a responsibility of believers to be involved, but I don't think the solution is to essentially legislate morality, because that needs to be something done in the home. That needs to be, that comes from the heart, you know, like you can have all the laws in the world and people are going to still break them if their heart's not right. You know. And
so maybe on a smaller level, but I mean, obviously something like murder, that's a moral issue.
Right, totally.
You think that should be legislated.
Absolutely. Those are, and those are things where I would say those are objective truths.
Right.
And that's where our society is in such a precarious place, in my opinion, right now, because objective truths of right and wrong, that regardless of what you believe from a faith standpoint, these are universal truths that God's placed into the human DNA or the human person, you know, where
it's inherent.
It's inherent, you know. I know I'm not supposed to murder. I know I'm not supposed to rape. I know I'm not supposed to rob.
What do you do with somebody though, like somebody like, I don't know, Jeffrey Dahmer or somebody like that who, well, I guess you'd have to get into their psyche to say whether or not they really think it's wrong or not. But I mean, some of these stories, I listen to a lot of true crime. I probably shouldn't because it's not good for my psyche. But some of these serial killers and some of these guys, I'm just amazed by what they're capable of doing to people and to children and to some of these. And I think to myself, does that guy does he really know, like deep down that that's wrong and he's just doing it because he likes it? Or is he just have some kind of flaw where he's so evil that he doesn't have a moral compass? Like he thinks, I'm just going to kill somebody, I'm going to rape somebody, so what? I don't care if they're 2 years old, doesn't matter to me, you know? So
I mean, I think that's, I mean, I'm no psychologist and I'm certainly
nor are you a serial killer, so you can't really, you know, at least I don't think you are.
So, I mean, in my opinion, I think at some point in their life, they decided to ignore their conscience.
Okay, so it's like that seared conscience thing. Okay.
At some point in their life, they made a choice to, like, whether that's like, I'm going to torture this little frog, even though I know it's wrong, and it's just like a little the snowball effect, you know, like it just starts with something little, and the more you cultivate it, the more you allow it to grow in you, eventually I think you do get to a place where you have seared your conscience, where you can do these unspeakable things without feeling like that conviction that most people have, because they haven't allowed their conscience to get that seared.
But it's got to be something that's more nature in some senses too, because like I think of myself right now as a 45-year-old, I don't think I could expose myself to any of that. Like if I was to say, okay, let's start killing frogs, or whatever the stepping stones are, I don't think I could ever get to a point where I could do some of the things that some of these people are doing. Like there's just no, I mean, not only could I not do it, I was gonna say, not only could I do it and be so convicted over I'm going to kill myself or something, I just don't even think I could do it. Right. I mean, if I was even going to plot it out and say, okay, I'm going to do this, I mean, I would never be able to do it. Like, I don't even think I could. Well, I've said this before, but I mean, like someone's breaking into my house and he has ill intentions to hurt my children or my wife.
Right.
And I had a gun.
Right.
Could I shoot him? Probably.
Yeah.
But I think I would be jacked up the rest of my life. Yeah. Even though I would feel like that was a justified shooting. Right. You know, protecting my family, I think, is a God-given right, and I did nothing wrong. Yeah. But just the idea that I killed a man would sit with me and eat at me for the rest of my life. Yeah. You know what I mean?
No, and I agree. And I think that there are some people that just... Well, and here's the thing. I think, obviously, the sin nature, the fallen nature is a very real thing. Mm-hmm. And there's a perversion in humanity that you can take pleasure in doing evil, right? You know, and I do think some people give themselves over to that. Like, I'm gonna I'm gonna grow that in me. Like, and I take it you can take it down to even a much lesser scenario of like somebody beating somebody else up. It would make me sick to like, I think of gangs and like the initiation where you have to go find a random person and beat the pulp out of them. It's
horrible.
Like that makes me sick to my stomach to think about. And so there is that aspect of without the Holy Spirit convicting, without allowing him to work in our lives, like any human is capable of the worst that we've seen, and there, whether that comes from because we've been, I don't know, like because we've chosen to do that, or because we've little by little compromised into that position where it's no longer a big deal. I still think the guilt of it, or I still think the culprit is the individual who's allowed themselves to get to that position where, whether they feel remorse or not, or guilt or not, it's something that they've willingly chose to do at some point.
Sure. And I think all of us can say that to some extent. Right. Like there's certain things we can allow ourselves to fall into or whatever, but very few of us could get to a point of rape, murder, and torture.
Yeah, totally.
Of young children or something. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like a special kind of person. And I don't mean special in a good way. I mean like, almost like this evil seed or something.
And I was just gonna say, and I one thing I think we often overlook is the demonic influence in people's lives. Like rape, murder, and torture, and those things. I think humanity is totally capable of that on its own without any demonic influence. Right. But I also think that the demonic is real, and people oftentimes allow themselves to be influenced through, whether it's music they're listening to, whether it's things they're watching on TV or online, that there are, just like worship helps us enter the presence of the Lord, there are things that the enemy puts out there that assist in someone moving more towards the enemy, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so,
for sure. And I agree with all of that. I just feel like there's another element that we're not able to see that's happening, right? Like to where, like I look at somebody like you and I, like we could watch anything, we could listen to anything, we could expose ourselves to the most horrendous things. I don't think either one of us are ever going to get to the point where we're rape, murdering, and killing and children. I just don't. I just don't see it happening. Right. Yet there's some people that are from an early age, like you look into some of these serial killers and stuff, and you say at an early age they were almost pulling legs off spiders, and they were cutting heads off of lizards and taking pleasure in it, and then when they were 10 they would do something weird, and it's just like, what's going on there? There's almost some kind of a deformity in their psyche or something. It's just something not right.
Yes. And that is, I mean, I don't know, that's one of those things. I know what you're saying, and I agree. There's times where you're just like, something's off with this individual, I don't understand it. And I don't know. I think that could fall into one of those categories of, we'll find out when we get there. That there was more going on than we knew. And
right. Well, to me, it gets back into the idea that you can that God can know who's who and who's going to receive, who's going to reject. And I think God even uses evil people. Right. For a purpose. Well, Judas is a perfect example, right? It says he was chosen for that reason. Like this evil act had to be carried out, so you need an evil person to do so. It wasn't that God made him evil. Right. He already was evil. Right. So he was chosen for that purpose. But I mean, so with him seeing that and knowing that, it's almost like this heart thing. Like whenever I talk about salvation, which is something we'll get into in a little bit, but it's like this idea that I think we kind of have a heart that responds yes or a heart that responds no.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're not even mentally aware of that. Like when I got saved, I was not mentally looking for God. I was not mentally seeking that. I didn't know I was looking for. I mean, I was obviously, but it wasn't a mental thing. It wasn't like I went to a church service and I heard the gospel and I was like, God. Yeah, it was nothing like that. Yeah. I did need God, and my heart knew that, but it hadn't yet communicated that to my brain. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it wasn't until after the fact that I realized, oh, wait a minute. Okay, now I see what's going on. Like for me, it was different. For me, it was like all these things happened to me. I got saved. I had a hunger for the Word, and then I started reading the Bible, this book I used to hate, and then I started reading about what happened to me. Yeah, like it was reversed. You know, so it was like, oh, this is what was going on. Okay,
that's so cool.
So I mean. So that just makes me wonder, like, even from an early age, if some of these kids, like, and it's hard, like, if you're the parents of the kid or whatever, and it's like, oh, man, this kid's turned out to be Charles Manson or something, you know, that they have a purpose. Yeah. Which is hard to talk about because it's like, how does God have a purpose for somebody like that? Yeah. Again, that's the why question. Like, totally. I don't know. Yeah. But for whatever reason, his heart not only said no. Yeah. But I'm going to go the total opposite direction and seek after the most evil things I can find. Right. You know, so.
Totally. Well, yeah, and that goes, to me, that just makes me think of, like Judas is a perfect example. You can be in the presence of the Lord. Mm-hmm. You can, like he was with them day in and day out for 3 years. So right. Saw how he treated people, saw his miracles, his power, his humility, his love, saw everything good, everything we're pursuing in life. That's kind of inherent, like I need this, you know? Right. And still decide, no, money is more important to me, you know? And right. So it's, I don't know if there's a clean answer for it. I think humans are messy and we're distorted, and I think given apart from God's grace, that who knows what we're capable of, you know. And it is I don't have necessarily a clean cut answer for that.
Oh, come on, man. I want a clean cut answer. I thought you had all the answers. This is what I was told.
that is, I don't know, I'm sure you can relate. It's when you start like having, you know, working with youth, you get a lot of questions and a lot of really good questions, and the more you get, the more you realize, like, I don't have the answers for a lot of these, and I don't think anybody does. You know, obviously I want to study and research and find out if I can get you a clean cut answer. Yeah, but there's so many things in life that we just don't have answers to, and there's things, especially spiritually speaking, that I don't think we'll ever know until we're there, you know?
Yeah, sometimes I don't know is a just fine answer. Yeah. And I'll usually tell people, and I don't know if you've ever, like you said, the kids ask you questions, you don't have an answer to do what you should say. I've said this sometimes. So, you know, I'm really flattered that you think I know everything, but I actually don't, so.
Why don't you find the answer and let me know?
Exactly, you know? Yeah. Or I'll say something like that, like, well, I'll try to look for that. Yeah. I mean, even if I'm in a discussion with another Christian, we're struggling over a certain Bible text or something, and just be like, well, I don't know. Yeah. I'll look for that answer for you. Yeah. Maybe I'll find it, maybe I won't.
And that's a legitimate answer, in my opinion. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Nice. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question of Christianity and politics and government.
So you're saying you're going to vote for Hillary is what you're saying?
No, I am not saying that. Gosh, no.
Well, what do you, so let's get back into the more like that kind of thing. Like we got, you know, there's all kinds of people on the table right now for the Republican primary. Yeah. Trump being one of them, unless all this indictment stuff ruins all that. I don't know if it will or not, but and there's a bunch of other people that are throwing their, you know, I think Pence just recently threw his hat in the ring. And so, you know, based on what we know of 4 years of Biden and what we know of 4 years of Trump. Yeah. My first question would be are you hoping it's Trump Biden again for the presidency fighting over, or are you hoping it's someone other than Trump in the Republican seat going against Biden? Yeah. So that's the first question.
Yeah, I go back and forth, to be honest, because part of me is like, I'm a skeptic in some way. When it comes to politics, I just am totally skeptical. There's a lot of Republicans who I am not a fan of, and just feel like they're just as culpable in the direction our country is going, which the direction it's going right now, I obviously disagree with.
Right.
And so there's times where I'm like, if another just career politician gets in there, are they just going to be somewhat of the same? And the aspect, I guess, that's appealing about Trump is that he's a bit of a wild card.
Right.
Like, he's not going to just fall in line with what is expected politically.
Right. Right.
And seeing how he did in his first term, where even though like I said, there's the way he treats people and interacts with people, like his personality, I'm not a fan of. The policies for me helped my life. Like gas was lower, prices were lower. Those were tangible things that were like beneficial. And so there's that aspect of, well, if he gets back in and puts it back to that, where all of a sudden gas is affordable, food's affordable, housing's affordable, like those are things I would like to see. I don't think I would like, to be honest, if I could choose, I wouldn't have Trump run again.
Okay.
Like I said, I love his policies for the most part. At least his national policies, his domestic policies. Loved his domestic policies. If it were between him and, I don't know, like I need to. So far, DeSantis is obviously a candidate.
You like DeSantis?
I would definitely consider voting for him.
I'm a big fan.
Totally, because I see what he did, what he's done in Florida.
Right? Yes.
And you're like, that's tangible proof.
Yet people on the left side of the aisle look at what he's done in Florida and say, I can't stand that guy. He's Satan. I hope he's dead.
Totally. It's so bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Like, the state's clean. Like, they don't have a major homeless problem. They don't have they have crime, but it's not like, of course, outrageous. Yeah. Their economy's booming. Their real estate's cheap. Far cheaper. Yep. And so there's part of me that's like, I don't know. It's just
it's hard to understand, right? And I've talked about this before, and I try not to put too much harshness to that side, just because as much as I feel that way about them, I can look at, like you just said, all those things that DeSantis is doing in Florida.
Right.
And I think this is great. Right. Well, they look at it and they say, this sucks.
Yeah.
And to me, that makes no sense. Right?
Totally.
But to them, it's the same thing. They look at me and they think, dude, that guy's nuts.
Yeah.
How can he believe these things, right? And it's almost like this just totally different mindset.
Living in two worlds.
It's weird, right? So I because I feel the way I do about their view, I can't help but have a little empathy towards them.
Right.
Because to them, it's, like I said, it's no different.
Yeah.
Right? But then you look at what I'm saying, it's like, I want to know those questions. I want to talk to them and say, well, why do you think, tell me policy-wise what DeSantis does that you have a problem with.
Yeah.
But usually what they're going to say is, he hates gay people.
Totally.
Which isn't true, right?
Yeah.
But that's what they'll say, and they'll throw stuff like that. Oh, the "Don't Say Gay" bill.
Yeah.
That never existed, right?
Totally.
You guys made that name up.
Totally.
You see what I'm saying?
Totally.
And to me, it seems like all these lies and deceits and all this agenda, right?
Yeah.
But I had someone on this show that's very left.
Yeah.
And we were talking about agenda, and his whole thing was, no, well, obviously the right has this huge agenda, right? And he was like, no, but the left doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I see it the other way around. Totally. And it just opens your mind to realize, I don't think these people are being malicious or dishonest or anything. It's just, they just see it differently. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's so weird.
And I've wondered too, like from a purely practical standpoint, I've often wanted to see what the answer is from, I guess, the more left side of the line. Mm-hmm. Like living here in California, it's very tangible what's taking place. Like, we've been dominated by these leftist policies for decades now.
Right.
And so we're seeing the results of them come to fruition. It's very tangible. Like, you see homelessness,
right,
drug use, crime, real estate prices, taxes. Like,
yeah,
we're leading the country in all of those things in a negative way. You know?
right, yeah.
Like, we have the highest crime rates, the highest drug rates, the highest taxes, the highest real estate prices, the lowest like income to housing prices. You know, I mean, we're leading in all the worst ways, and it's just, to me, I'm so curious as to the justification to continue implementing those policies when we see the tangible results of them. And that's where I feel like there's a disconnect, because I understand, like, I have a lot of friends who are on the left side, and usually their reasoning are ideologically based. Like, they're against the, like, they're pro-abortion, right? There's these ideological things where they're voting that way because they think it's like a moral issue,
right?
And to some extent, even though I disagree with them, I can understand that. What I have a hard time understanding is when you get down to the policies, and how they affect our day-to-day life,
right?
Why they're willing to, like, how they can justify that, in the sense of, like, I'm willing to live with more crime, more homelessness, higher taxes, higher real estate, lower income, higher inflation. These are all things I'm willing to live with on a day-to-day basis, because I don't want somebody in Iowa or in Florida having an abortion ban.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, like, so it's so bizarre to me that they're willing to I guess live with the results of the policies they're implementing, which are, like, provably and categorically, like, detrimental to society. You can look throughout all the country, all the places that are leftist controlled, who's have implemented leftist policies for years now, are all some of the worst places to live in the country. And these are, like, categorical. Like, the data's there, you can see it black and white.
Well, and it's almost like you said, they overlook all that, because the bigger issue to them is the freedom to be able to kill your children, or the freedom for men to wear dresses, or the freedom to be openly homosexual. I'm like, all these things, and I understand those are issues, but like you said, from my right mindset, I don't mean like right and wrong, right and left, my conservative mindset, I look at that and I think, those are issues, but they're not the issue. That doesn't really affect my day-to-day living. And maybe someone in the LGBT community would say, well, that does affect my day-to-day living, because this is who I am. And if I don't even have the freedom to be who I am, but there's no states that I know of that aren't allowing them to be who they are. There's no states that have a law against being homosexual or being trans or being anything. But they try to make it that, with all this stuff happening with the fights against, they're calling it transing the kids, the whole surgeries for minors, like sex change surgeries for minors and all these things. And people say, well, that's because those states are anti-trans. No, they're not. They're anti-child abuse, right? That's what they care about. And I had this discussion again about the drag story hour. Oh, everybody hates drag now. No, nobody's fighting against drag. Drag's been around for 1,000,000 years. Well, not 1,000,000 years. A long time. Nobody's fighting against it. People are saying, hey, that's not my thing, but if that's your thing, go ahead. But as soon as you start involving children,
Totally.
Now people are up in arms.
Right.
So they try to make it a fight that it's not.
Right.
Like, this state hates trans, this state hates drag. No, they don't.
Well,
right?
And I believe that they do that, or that's the argument they make, because if they don't, there's no ground to stand on for that argument. Because if they don't make it a life or death argument, there really is no ground to stand on. There's no reason why you should be exposing children to drag shows. There's no reason why you should be teaching them about transgenderism.
Correct.
Or
any sexual. Exactly.
Yeah, like
there's in third grade?
Yeah, there's absolutely no logical reason to expose children, or to have our school system have any sort of curriculum at all that has to do with sexuality.
Right.
Like, that is not something that our government should be in control of.
I totally agree with you.
And so
that's why we homeschool.
Right. And so totally. And so if there's no good argument for why it should be, and so if it's not this life or death thing of like, well, you're trying to kill us, that's why we're doing it.
Right.
There's no argument to be made.
That's a great point, dude. You hit it on the head. That's exactly it.
And there is no argument to be made,
because you're not going to argue in the way of saying, well, no, we really want kids to be able to go to drag shows.
Right.
We really want kids to be exposed to this sexually explicit material.
Totally.
Because you sound like an idiot if you're trying to argue that.
Totally. And it's super provable. Like, you're just grooming the kid for child abuse, like for sexual child abuse. Like, you're literally just grooming them to be okay with things that are not okay sexually for them. And so the argument in reality is child abuse is what they're arguing for.
Right.
But logically, they're not going to argue that. No. And so they have to make it
makes them look bad.
Exactly. And again, it's quantifiably wrong. Like, you can quantifiably prove that that's wrong, you know?
Right.
And so then that's why, in my opinion, they make it this life or death situation of like, I'm voting this way because if not, they're going to kill trans people.
Right.
There's, like you said, there's nowhere in the country that you can't be a trans person.
Right.
That there's nowhere in the country that's going to limit your freedoms or liberties.
At least on a government level.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean there aren't people that are transphobic that are going to go around being mean to trans people. Of course. But that's different than saying it's government sanctioned. You know, that's totally different. That's like, I mean, that's anything. It's like racism.
Yeah.
It's like saying, are there going to be racist people that are going to attack people because they're a different race?
Yeah.
Sure.
100%.
But does that mean there's a law in place that, like back in the day, it says, oh, no black people can eat at this restaurant?
Right.
That's racist in policy, governmentally, right? That's totally different. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it is, to be honest, that is one of the things that concerns me most and is hardest to see developing in our culture is this attack on the children, you know, because it feels very deliberate and very intentional, and obviously it's super basic. It's not like you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you get children, if you begin to mold their thinking in one way, then as adults, that's how they're gonna be, you know? And so if they can get this agenda into school curriculum as, you know, as young as possible, then they know that that's how they're gonna develop as adults for the majority of kids, you know, that's how they're gonna be their worldview.
Right.
And so it is frustrating because just like it should be, church and state should be separated. I view this kind of the new whatever LGBT community. It's become a religion. You know?
For sure.
And it's very much a religion, and so it's the frustrating part is because they won't admit to that and essentially a religion. You have a code of ethics and an ideal that you believe in. Right. So the ideal that you believe in informs your code of ethics. And so they have this ideal that they believe in, that sexuality should be anything to anyone at any time, regardless of age, maturity, brain development.
Right.
And their code of ethics is to advance that, right? And at any cost, in any way. And so it is very much a religion, except that it's not recognized as a religion, and therefore, there's kind of this loophole, you could say, where they or I don't think it's a loophole. It's their way of trying to infiltrate or trying to manipulate legislature to advance their religious beliefs, right? But if Christians did that, there would be an outcry because separation of church and state, you know, you can't do that. But it's very much the same thing. Exactly what they're doing.
But they would disagree, right? They wouldn't. Your assessment that it's a religion, they would disagree with that.
Totally.
That's why they wouldn't see it that way.
Right. And yeah, exactly. They. But again, religion, if you boil it down to its most basic principle, it's a ideological belief or you know, you have a governing belief that informs your code of ethics or how you interact with the world. And so you know, Christians live because they believe the Bible and Christ, and that therefore informs how they
impacts their entire life.
Impacts their entire life, and this community, the trans community or whatever, I'm not sure how you would the LGBT community. They have this philosophical belief or this ideological belief, and it informs every aspect of their life, and they want it to inform every aspect of society, which again, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it impacts every aspect of their life.
And so it's
understandably
quite frustrating because if you remove if I remove my spiritual convictions out of it, and I'm just going on a purely what's fair by the law basis, if this group of people's ideological beliefs are not allowed to be legislature, you know, not allowed to be law of the land, then this group of people's beliefs shouldn't be allowed to be law of the land either, you know? And so in that aspect, and more than just being frustrating from the logical standpoint or fair standpoint, it's it's tragic, really, it's quite there's kind of a righteous anger that comes when you see it being imposed upon children.
So as there should be. I mean, if you love kids, you should be up in arms about this.
And to be honest, even if you're within that the trans community, I don't understand why you would be arguing that it's okay for children to be in those situations. They're all but pornographic. You know what I mean? It's there's nothing about a man dressing up as a woman or vice versa. There's no. There's no reason why a child needs to be a part of that community.
Well, there is a reason. It's just not a good one.
Totally.
Their reason is normality. They want to normalize it. They want it so that when I'm walking down the street with my little girl and she sees a man in a dress, she doesn't think that's weird. That's normal. That's what they're trying to do. And again, if I try to put myself in their shoes, I get it. If that's me and I walk around and I want to dress like a woman or I want to be a certain way, I don't want people to look at me like I'm weird. I want to be accepted. I want to be normal. But unfortunately, I'm not if I'm doing that. You know, it's you know.
And I would push back a little bit on that. I understand that the gender dysphoria is a real thing. There are people who genuinely have some sort of mental
disorder
that. But if you're a man dressing up as a woman for sexual purposes, I can't help but believe that there's a certain part of you that wants attention for it.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
But they won't say it that way usually, right? And I would agree. It's just like the punk rock thing, right?
Because you could just as easily do that in the privacy of your own home, in the privacy of other people's homes, and nobody would know. Nobody would think you're like any different, like out in public. Nobody would look at you differently.
Exactly.
But in going out in public, in that there's a part of human nature that wants attention and wants to be looked at, and so there's a part of me that believes that it's not simply for the sake of not wanting to be looked at differently. Like if you're doing that, there's a part of you that does want to be looked at differently because you're making such an effort for the public to see you that way.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
totally.
So,
but they won't say it that way.
Right,
They'll say like, "No, this is just who I am. Just leave me alone. I just want to be myself. I'm not doing this for anybody else.
So
I don't want attention. I don't want anybody to. I don't know. You know."
And then, and my response will be, "Well, why do kids have to be? Why can't you just let kids be kids? If they think that's weird, they're kids. Let them think that's weird.
Right?
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
until they're old enough, and then they can understand what it is, and still think it's weird.
Totally.
But at least now they understand. Right. They can maybe understand where the person's coming from, even if they don't agree with it.
Yeah.
Like me, like I have no problem understanding their philosophy. I like to wear dresses. I'm going to wear dresses. Okay, I understand that. It's not like I'm like, well, that doesn't. I don't understand why. No, I just disagree.
Right.
Totally. There's a difference between understanding. But people try to say, well, you just don't understand, Ryan. No, I understand perfectly. Tell me what it is I don't understand.
Yeah.
And I'll try to do better. But I'm pretty sure I understand 100%.
Totally.
I just disagree.
Right.
And that's why you're assuming I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, because if you understood, you'd agree.
Right.
No, I wouldn't.
And that, again, I think that's where the identity politics come in.
Yes.
Because they're so wrapped up in... Their identity's so wrapped up in these, like their arguments, that if you disagree with their argument, you're somehow invalidating their existence.
Yes.
You know,
right.
And the other aspect to that argument is, like, my opinion is, who cares if somebody invalidates my existence?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why am I so worried about what some random person thinks or disagrees with me that I'm willing to, like, base my whole existence on whether or not they agree or disagree with me?
Right.
You know?
But do you think that's because of your faith, that you have identity in Christ, and that's really your main focus?
Yes.
For somebody that doesn't have that, their identity is in other people and what other people see. And that's why you got so many people posting, especially women, posting pictures on Facebook. So everybody say, oh, you're so pretty, you're so beautiful, you're beautiful.
Yeah.
Because they need that.
Totally.
You know?
Human nature needs to know its identity.
Yes.
There's something in everybody seeking purpose, seeking identity, and I totally agree that it stems from that issue for sure.
So I want to dive into spiritual stuff, and usually when I do that with someone who holds a lot of the same beliefs, I usually kind of try to play devil's advocate and kind of, hit you with the apologetic stuff. But I know you mentioned quite a few times, you said it throughout the course of our conversation about objective truth.
Yes.
So do you hold to like an absolute truth kind of stance?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So what kind of things would you put in that category?
I mean, I think that there is absolute truth. You can't have like a relative worldview. You know, I just don't think there's, in terms of being a Christian and holding a relative like worldview, there has to be objective truth. Otherwise, it's your opinion versus my opinion, and so something or someone So the Creator has created everything, and He's determined a moral code, right? And so like Paul talks about in that we all have our conscience, and we can all look at nature and determine whether there's a creator or not. And so there are certain things that are just objectively true. And yeah, so I would say like morality, certainly it can, the waters can get muddied at a certain point.
Right.
But it's kind of like I view it as it starts from a single point, and kind of like if God's the objective truth, if He's the ultimate truth, and it's like trickling down through humanity, at a certain point you can get to like muddied water where you're like, is it wrong to steal bread to feed my family?
Right.
Like you can get into those questions where I can understand the debate, Right. But there's certain things that I feel are not debatable that He's made very...
Like what?
Like murder, rape. Okay. Like you look at those things where objectively any moralistic society or moralistic person would say those things are wrong. And there's no reason why those things are true or why they should be allowed,
Right. And when we say murder, we're talking about like premeditated.
Right. Like,
you're not talking about self-defense.
Right,
you're not talking about killing animals. Some people say,
totally.
you should be a vegetarian because murder's wrong.
I think there's a difference between murder and killing.
Okay.
Killing is taking a life, and I think you can kill, even though it's not the primary, like it's not a good thing. Like I don't think killing is ever should be something to be desired,
right? But
it's necessary at times. Whereas I believe murder is, like you said, like premeditated. Right. It's done out of evil intent.
Yes. Yeah.
Killing can be done out of like you said, self-defense. Can be done out of protecting innocence. It can be done out of a moral code.
Right.
But there's objectively, like, and even that you can get into an argument of, well, you should never kill, but even that argument kind of breaks down when you get to, well, is it okay to, if I don't like this person, just kill them because I don't like them, or they have something I want, so I kill them to take what I want. Right. A rational, normal person would say, no, that type of killing, that is wrong. That's murder. Right. That's totally wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that objective truth, then that governs that viewpoint or governs those decisions, then you get into opinion versus opinion, which becomes very dangerous and very chaotic, because then it becomes, again, simply, well, if there's not this objective truth telling me that murder's wrong, then it's just your opinion telling me that murder's wrong.
Right.
And you're not God, and so why should I listen to you? Why can't I just go murder this person and take what I want? Right. So I very much agree, and there is an absolute.
But what if I was to say to you that I don't think, my opinion is that murder's okay? How would you argue against my position? If my opinion is it's okay, and your opinion is that it's wrong, how do we know who's right?
Who's right?
As far as whether murder's wrong or not. Like, if my opinion is murder is totally fine, there's nothing wrong with murder. If I don't like somebody's face, I should be able to shoot them.
Right.
Who are you to tell me otherwise?
Well, and I think we are getting to that point in society. And I think there's certainly people that hold that viewpoint, and it is hard to argue, in my opinion, that viewpoint. I'm sure there's some apologists out there and that have a much better argument against it if somebody holds that viewpoint.
Right.
My argument is that life's sacred. There's an inherent instinct in everybody to survive, to continue life at all costs, right? And so if I would say, well, would it be okay then for me to kill you?
Right.
And if there's that argument, like, then if they were to say, yes, it's okay for you to kill me, then I guess my argument would be, who determines what life is valuable and what life isn't then?
Right.
Like, at some point there has to be an opinion outside of humanity that we go by, right? Because otherwise it's human opinion versus human opinion. It's my life is more valuable than your life because I said so.
Right.
And to me, that there's no basis for that argument. To me, like, if you're looking at it objectively, there's no basis for that argument because all human life has an inherent value. Again, if you get into people who would argue that it doesn't, I don't know how. That's a hard place to be, because what is the argument against that? If human life has no value, then from a societal standpoint, a civil standpoint, I would say the argument is, if that's the case, then there will be total chaos.
Right.
And so the very fact that humanity, 99.9% of humans value life in the sense that murder is wrong in their eyes.
Right.
And because they want a civil society where they don't have to worry about being killed, then the argument is, what gave us that moral inclination that I don't want to be killed, I want to just live in life without the worry of my neighbor coming to kill me for my TV or whatever.
Yeah, and one of the things that they've done studies on as of recently is about the value of life. Like, most people value their own lives.
Right.
But the value for the lives of others, just on a level of, that's another human. Like, obviously our loved ones are valuable to us.
Right.
Our friends, our family, wife or children, that kind of thing, valuable to us. But some guy I don't know, how valuable is he to me? And I've mentioned before, I saw a thing once, I want to say it was Ray Comfort that did. You're familiar with Ray Comfort?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So he did a thing where he was asking people, if you're at a swimming pool and your dog, who you love, is in there and drowning, and your neighbor, who you don't even know, a human, is in there and they're both drowning, you can only save one. Who are you going to save? 95% of people said their dog.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because they know and love their dog. See, so they're viewing the value of human life as the same as the value of some animal life, right? Obviously, the same people will go eat a cheeseburger, no problem. But if it's little Sparky, you got to save little Sparky, because I love little Sparky. This John Smith over here, I don't even know that guy.
Right. It's so interesting.
It's fascinating because you can't do it on a level of, I know that guy, because most people, we said, okay, it's your dog who you love and it's your brother, who's so close to you. They're going to say my brother.
Right.
But if it's, because the whole point was human life over animal life.
Right.
What's more sacred?
Sacred, yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, and that, I would say that's very telling of the culture that we've created of we've made ourselves God, where you would literally let a human drown based on your preference.
Right.
You know what I mean? Based on, I feel feelings for this dog of love, and so I'm going to let a human drown, because what's important is not human life, but my own personal
It's
pleasure.
Selfish, right?
It's a selfish mindset.
Which in a sense could be said even for your own kid. If you replace the scenario and you say, okay, it's my kid drowning and my neighbor.
Right.
Or you could even say it's my kid drowning and my best friend, who's an adult. For most of us, we're going for our kid.
Totally.
We hope we can save them both.
Right.
But if the scenario says you can only save one, who's it going to be?
Yeah.
It's my kid every time.
Totally.
Right. So.
But but there's reason for that. There's in my opinion, there's a justified reason for that. That there's a one. there's the parental instinct of I have to protect.
Right.
This was my God-given role.
Exactly.
Is to protect my offspring, you know, and to like facilitate their life and longevity. And so, obviously, both lives are equally valuable, but it comes down to who do you have more of a responsibility to. Right. And I would say, as a father, your first responsibility would be to your child rather than to your neighbor or friend.
Right. Yes, I would agree.
And so I would say it comes down to more of a responsibility. But yeah, it's the dog human thing is fascinating because it just kind of is indicative of the culture that we don't value human life anymore. Right. You know.
Right. Which is scary.
It is scary because it gets back to that very argument of if someone doesn't value human life, there's more morality kind of goes out the window because that is kind of the pinnacle of human law is just the fundamental or the instinctive value of life, right? Like human law is kind of all based around that. That humans have a value, their life has a value, and therefore.
But that's almost a Christian principle, though, right? Because we see it as humans are made in the image of God, animals are not.
Right.
Totally. So we see it that way, but culture is dictating otherwise, right? They're going a different direction with it. They don't see us as image bearers or God. They see it as just it's just a person.
Well,
different. They got a heart, they got lungs, they breathe. What's the difference?
Totally.
So they can think. Right. They have a brain capacity to think more than a cow does. Who cares? Yeah. Right. Like.
No, and that's a really good point. And I do think that's the enemy's tactic. If he can get humans, if Satan can get humans to view human life as no different than animal life, plant life, if he can get us to remove the image bearer characteristic, then you can kill, you can live lawless without any moral compass guiding you, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and so I do very much feel like that mindset or that principle is a demonic idea that has been essentially, infiltrated into humanity and promoted by I think it's demonic. I think it very much is a demonic influence.
It seems to serve that purpose for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be such a hard argument to have with somebody that has no value for human life.
Right.
Because it's kind of the basis of all morality and law. It comes down to, in which case I would say it would be something that psychologically wrong with that person.
Right. Well, the study doesn't necessarily show it goes as far as saying they don't have any regard for human life, just that they put animals on the same level playing field to where if it's my dog who I know, I'm sure it's the knowing aspect that makes it the kicker, right? If it was just some stray dog you don't know and your neighbor who you don't know, most people will probably say the neighbor.
The neighbor, yeah.
So, but as soon as it's your loved one being your pet, is being put on the same level as a human who you don't know, that's where it's kind of tricky. But
and I think that speaks to the, to the argument of who, are we God, or is there someone greater than us outside of humanity that's determining right and wrong? Because all that's going off of is our feelings, to save our dog over another human is at the heart of it just going off our feelings of attachment towards this animal. And I think that kind of goes back to this idea of, I'm my own God. what matters most is my feelings.
Right.
You know.
Right. Again, back to selfishness.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I got 2 areas I'm going to hit
Okay.
to bring us out here. The first one is just a salvation kind of topic. As far as, so you said your parents were Christians. You
Yes.
grew up in the church.
Yeah.
You talked about some back and forth. Do you view it that you were saved as a little child and then you maintained that, or do you think you got saved later in life but you had the building blocks from an early child? Like, how would you describe your own journey there?
Yeah. So I probably it's one of my, if not my earliest memory. I believe I was saved at 3 years old.
Okay.
I remember I was driving in the car with my mom. I was in the back seat, you know, my child seat or whatever, and I asked my mom, how do I get to heaven, you know? And it was I remember the conversation. I remember like having that desire, like I wanted to go to heaven.
Right.
And I don't even at that age know how I had an understanding of heaven.
what kind of 3-year-old even asked that question? Right.
Like I don't know where it came from. I know obviously my parents were strong believers, and so I'm guessing maybe I overheard something they said. But I remember asking her that, and so she led me through the sinner's prayer and in a way that a 3-year-old can understand, you know. And I remember driving in the car asking the Lord into my heart, you know, and asking forgiveness for my sins, and so from the time of that, I feel very fortunate and blessed, and I'm often I guess just at a loss for words as to the kind of the grace that the Lord showed me, because from that moment, faith was never belief in God was never in doubt. Like I don't remember ever having a time where I didn't feel like the Lord was with me, if that makes sense. So like even like all throughout childhood, I just felt the Lord was with me. And there was, in high school, I would say it was probably started my freshman year. My freshman year was really hard. You know, you go from junior high into high school, and it's like you go from like a school
big fish to a small fish. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have very many friends, and I felt very lost in the sea of high schoolers, and I started hanging out with some older kids who were into the party scene, and I started going to parties. I was still very much a believer, still very much had a walk with the Lord, and I started getting in more and more into the party scene. And it was my sophomore year. I remember I was at the drive-thru of Jack in the Box. It was around midnight after a party, and you know, I wasn't like raging. It wasn't like I was like some drug addict or anything. I just was going to these parties around things I knew I shouldn't have been around, and there finally had kind of got to this point where I started to compromise a little bit. Like I was for a long time pretty good at like not compromising and just being like on the fence and outskirts and being like, oh, I'm just here, I'm the designated driver or whatever, you know, like I'm just here to be a good influence. And then I found myself, it was after a party where I did compromise and participated in stuff I shouldn't have, and I was in the drive-thru at Jack in the Box around midnight, and I very, very distinctly heard the Holy Spirit just say, "What's it going to be, Dan? You got to pick a side."
Wow.
And I knew obviously exactly what he meant. Like I couldn't live on the fence. I couldn't have one foot in my relationship with the Lord and one foot going out to parties and doing things that he's called me not to participate in. And so it was in the drive-thru at Jack in the Box that I my freshman year, my sophomore year, that I just kind of made the commitment, like, okay, Lord, I'm all yours. Like, I don't want to be part of this world. I want to be yours. I want to do what your will is for my life. I want to pursue you, because that part of the reason why I was going to the parties and doing that was because I felt like I wanted friends, and I was still kind of like searching for that. I thought somehow, like, if I reached like a certain popularity or something, that there would be something there for me. But it just kept like it just made me more and more empty, you know. And so it wasn't like that stuff was satisfying anything, and I knew that. And so so for me, that, like, when the Lord posed that question, it was like, okay, Lord, I get it. Like, I'm all in, you know. But I will say, I knew in answering that way and giving Him my life and commitment, I knew that meant I was going to have no friends again, because all my friends partied. And so I knew it was like, okay, Lord, if I do this, that means I'm going to have no friends. And that at that time, that was like one of the biggest reasons why I was doing what I was doing, was because I wanted friends. And so I just started praying. I was like, Lord, just bring me one Christian friend. I just want one Christian friend that I can relate to. And I know this means I'm not going to have friends for a while, but please just bring me one Christian friend. I'd say it was probably within 2 months I met my friend Jeremy Grubbs. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, Jason Grubbs.
Yeah. So I met his younger brother. Jeremy, and Jeremy surfed, and
they were all surfers in that family, weren't they? I think Jason went to Hawaii or something for it.
Jason was really good at surfing. So I met Jeremy, and he took me to a Bible study at my friend Paul Smith's house, and it was like a surfer's Bible study. And so I met Paul, and then Paul and Jeremy became like my best friends.
That's awesome.
I met a number of other Christian friends that surfed and stuff at that Bible study, and I just found a really good community there. And Paul's still one of my best friends to this day.
Oh, cool.
In fact, through that, his friendship, so many doors opened in my life. Like, it's just kind of crazy. I can trace back so many major, I guess, major themes in my life, and major moves that the Lord did in my life can all be traced back. Like, I can trace them all back through that, you know, and to that decision at Jack in the Box. And
all over mozzarella sticks, man.
Exactly.
That's quite a conversion story there. Gave my heart to the Lord over some mozzarella sticks. That's awesome.
So
well, that's cool,
anyways,
man.
That's
okay.
So I would say, I knew the Lord from an early childhood, and I had a relationship with Him. But it was in high school that I really committed to, I'm going to pursue your call in my life, you know?
Yeah, see, and a lot of the stories I hear almost has to be that, even for people like you who believe they were saved at such an early age. But you almost have to get to some point of maturity where you're like at a crossroads.
Yeah.
You know, whether you were saved then or not, or I mean, there's all those questions and stuff. But you get to a point where you're like, okay, am I going to follow the Lord, or am I going to follow my flesh? Am I going to serve the Lord or serve the world? You know, kind of thing. And you have to make that decision. And so I know a lot of people that try to do both, and it doesn't work out for them. And it's just like, that's cool, man.
I think part of it is just owning it yourself. Like, you have to come to a point where like at 3, obviously I don't understand the full implications of even life at that point, right? You don't understand you're going to have to support yourself when you get older. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to have all these responsibilities, let alone the significance of what it means to live for the Lord. And yes, I do think you get to an age of maturity where you make a decision, which I don't think I wasn't. I believe I was saved wholeheartedly. But it was at Jack in the Box where I believe I wholeheartedly committed my life in a different direction.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Were you like at the window waiting for your food, or were you back at the ordering section? Like where did it happen? In between.
So I had ordered my food and I was in line waiting to pull up to the window.
Right.
And I just like so distinctly heard his Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit say, you know, what's it going to be? And
that's awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of.
So you had just heard the Jack in the Box employee say, "What's it going to be?" And you told them what it was going to be. And then in between there and the get the food, you hear the Lord say, "What's it going to be?"
Eternal life.
Yeah. You had a different menu in front of you at that point, you know. So, all right, cool. So the last thing I like to do is to say, we're going to assume for the base of this that I believe, I'm going to pretend I'm somebody else now, but I do believe God exists.
Right.
Okay. But I don't believe your religion, your Christianity is the right path. I believe, you know, as long as you believe in a God, as long as you follow a God, doesn't matter if it's Allah, Jesus, whatever, or just some generic name for God, whatever, that you're going to be fine. You're gonna end up in heaven someday, in paradise, whatever. So how would you respond to me? Like, if I was truly seeking, let's say I was like, you know, Dan, just really tell me, like, explain to me why your way is the correct way.
Yeah. On something like that, my first response would be that position is contradictory in nature, because the religions of the world that we know, or the belief systems, even atheism, like the claiming to not believe anything, they're all at odds with each other. And so you can't have one saying it's okay to kill somebody because they're attacking our belief system or whatever, or even something smaller than the murdering aspect. You can't have one that, like Christianity, that claims to be the only way, and yet another one like Hinduism or Buddhism that's kind of more like they're all good, you know, like they're at odds with each other. Either one's right or one's wrong.
Right.
But you can't have all of them be right. It's like you can't say it on a road map. You know, you can't have a destination and say, if you go west, you'll reach it, and if you go north, you'll reach it. Because obviously those are in two completely opposite directions. And so,
but what if they all teach love one another and do good things? If they all share those core beliefs, isn't that good enough?
Well, then you get into what is love, right? Like who defines love? Who defines these core beliefs? Because to the nation of, you know, the religion of Islam, it's very much, in many sects of it, and I would say the majority of it, it's very much okay to kill infidels. You know, there's very much that's a noble, good cause to kill infidels, to kill Christians, or whatever the case may be. And so who's determining what love is? Like, is it man? Like, so again, that's a contradiction in terms and nature. And so, so then that would be, I guess my next response would be, you have to then determine what is love and who has determined that. And again, for me, it comes back to having, you know, studied the Bible and studied Christianity, having studied other religions, having my own life experiences. Nothing answers these questions, and nothing fulfills the essentials in a satisfactory manner like except for Jesus, right? Like,
Right.
so you can sure find good aspects in other religions and be like, that's a good truth or a good principle to live by.
Right.
But they don't answer the greater, like, deeper questions of existence, of purpose, of who determines what's right and wrong, and then ultimately justice, right? Like, there has to be there has to be an accounting for all the evil and wrong done in this world, and no other like belief system can give a adequate answer for that, in my opinion.
Okay.
But
if someone came to you and they said all that same thing is true about their religious belief, and it wasn't Christianity,
right?
You would then ask questions and say, well, what about these questions?
Yeah, exactly.
How does your religion answer these questions?
Yeah, exactly. I would come at it more from the aspect of asking questions. Okay, well, what about like sin?
Right.
You know, like how if we believe in justice, right? Like on a human level, if I murder somebody and I get caught, there should be a punishment, some sort of justice that is placed, that is instituted for that life that I took.
Right.
And so you get into that discussion and you find that ultimately everybody stands convicted, right?
Right.
At some point we've all sinned, and so at some point everybody has to be judged, and there has to be some sort of justice made for everybody.
Right.
And so again, when you study the different belief systems, and nothing adequately answers that apart from Christ, you know, like apart from God himself providing the payment for all of it. And so there's, I don't know, for me, that's how I approach it, is more from asking questions and being like, okay, and trying to find common ground, because there is a lot of common ground. Most people that hold that viewpoint hold it because they don't want to offend people,
right?
Or hold it because they don't want to make assertive standpoint and be like, okay, this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah. Have you gone through places of doubt where you question whether or not your belief system is true?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you get through those times? Like, what gets you through that to where you come out on the other side? I'm assuming still believing and still maybe even more solid than you were when you went into that place.
Yeah, totally. I've certainly gone through times where I don't know if I've ever. I've gone through times where I've definitely asked the Lord, like, why did this happen? Why did you allow this? If you're real, if you love me,
right? Like,
why? You know, and I think sometimes, and I believe he allows us to go through those seasons.
Well, for sure.
To strengthen our faith.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to try to fall back on the times that I know he's spoken to me. I know he's intervened in my life. I know he's proven himself, and remind myself of those times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's even when you're in the midst of like the dark night of the soul, a lot of times those reminders or those memories seem insufficient, you know?
Right.
And sometimes I think it's just a matter of getting to the point of surrender, you know, where you're just, I don't get it, God, I don't understand, but I obviously can't look at the universe and say, we're just randomly here.
Right.
You know, so I have to believe that you are real, and if you're real, then you had a purpose in this design, and if you had a purpose, then there's a purpose for me being here,
right?
And it just kind of goes back from there. But yeah, I've had times where I think one of the one of the times I think of when you say that is just thinking of, I had a like a moment where you just have that thought of like, oh man, what if I die right now?
Right.
And do I really believe everything I confess to believe?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And that is I think that's a healthy question to ask ourselves, because you kind of have to get to that point of being okay with not having all the answers,
right?
But trusting that even in times where God seems like he's missing in action,
right,
that he's still there and there's still a good plan,
right. You have enough answers, right? You don't have to have every answer. And you just reminded me of a story that a pastor I had told one time about, I think it was in another country, but there was a church service and a bunch of guys came in with masks and guns and the whole thing, and they held everybody up and they said, all right, either deny Christ or we're going to shoot you right here on the spot, right? So you can leave, deny Christ and leave, or we're going to kill you, right? And like 80% of the congregation left, right? So we don't believe in Jesus, see you later. As soon as that happened, all the guys took their masks off and said, okay, we're Christians. We just wanted to know who was real Christians in here, right? Which is not necessarily fair, because I think to myself, in a time of desperation, maybe I got my kids, I'm like, I don't believe this at all, see ya.
Right.
But who knows until you're in that situation. Right. But, and I don't think that somebody that left is definitely not saved or whatever. Right. But it's just an interesting thing that sometimes these days you kind of have to go drastic sometimes to find out who's the real deal. Or you have to be close enough with them to watch them go through things like what you're talking about. Yeah. And say, okay, this guy does go through times of doubt. Yeah. He's not just, I was raised in the church and don't bother me with any criticisms or convictions or anything. I don't want to hear any of that. I'm just going to keep believing because I want it to be true. Right. I think we all have to go through that time of really questioning. Totally. And I think with Christianity, this is what I've found, is that you come out more solid on the other side. Totally. Because the more you attack it, the more you see it can't be attacked. Totally. Right. And you look at people like C.S. Lewis or Lee Strobel, or like some of these people that set out to devalify it. Is that a word? Devalify. I think it's a made up word. to prove it wrong, basically. Yeah. And came out on the other side saying, "Wow, this is true." Yeah. There's a lot of evidence to support this. Totally. That I hated it. So, but anyway, so.
Well, and I think of like there's certain aspects of just the natural world that we take by faith. And we don't think twice about it, like gravity. Like, nobody can, you can have the mathematical equation or whatever to prove it, but nobody can see gravity, right? And nobody can touch gravity. Right. And we just take it without ever thinking, so I do think it, like you said, it's super healthy for Christians to question their faith and be like, is this real? Why do I believe this? Like, am I willing to, if I die right now, am I willing to place my eternity? Am I willing to place everything in this belief? Because, and it's certainly not, it's not like you're always going to answer it and be like, oh, totally confident. Yeah. Right.
I understand everything there is to know now.
Yeah. Totally. Like I do feel like there's times where we're like, I don't know. I have enough answers to believe and to trust and to have faith, but I don't have all the answers, and so maybe, and
you might gain more as you go, and as you go through those times, and I think that's all part of the growth process, and that's the beauty of it, right? We're not supposed to be the same today as we were when we got saved 20 years ago. There's supposed to be progression. So
and like muscles, if you don't work them out and use them, they atrophy, and faith is kind of the same way,
Right. Why are you looking at my muscles when you said that?
Dude, they look super solid. I was really impressed.
Thanks, man. All right, well, thanks for coming, dude.
Yeah.
Glad we finally able to do this. It's fun stuff.
Honored to do it and be here. Thank you.
Well, you made it to the end of another episode. Thanks. I really appreciate you. If you have anything you would like to say to me, You can reach me at Why Can't We Talk About That at proton.me. Or you could ask to join the Why Can't We Talk About That podcast Facebook group and share your thoughts there. Please leave a review or two. Thanks. Here's part of what next week's episode will sound like.
I'm very much protect all children, but let's protect our children from that too.
Right.
Let's protect our children from being able to be 12 years old, walk into a clinic and say, I don't want my parents to know, but I'm transgender.
Right.
Because when they're 22 and they regret every decision and their parents were trying to make them see reason.
Right.
Because there's a difference between being abusive and being, narcissistic and being, holding somebody back versus I'm trying to make you see reason. Right. I'm trying to, I'm trying to give you the tools and trying to make you see why this isn't a good idea yet, And if in 10 years you decide you still feel the same way, absolutely, I was wrong, I will eat my words.
Right.
But in those instances when there are these kids, it's not okay. Right. It's not okay for doctors and for the law to step in and say, oh, well, this is child abuse if you don't let your kid go to the doctor by themselves and get these,
right.
Get these hormones.
Right.